All right, this afternoon we'll be looking at feeds, feed, grains, and hatchery. And the first presentation is entitled Changes in the Outlook for Global Trade in Grains. And the first presenter is Mr. Chavir, who is a CEO for a company in France with over 30 years experience in shipping and trading from the United States, Europe, to the Caribbean, South America, and back. So without any further ado, I will ask Mr. Chavir to now come and take the podium and to deliver his presentation. Mr. Chavir.
I hope my English won't be too bad. I just wanted to present you a little bit this yearly market and also the evolution in the grain, which is the basis of our raw material to feed the chicken, and 3 points, which are the soybean, or soy meal rather, the corn, and the shipping, which this year has been very, very complicated. So before getting into details of the feed market, we must take a look at the macroeconomic situation. Indeed, our markets are dependent on the weather and the area harvested and the yields, but also dependent on geopolitical situation. Currently, we are facing some export tax modification in Argentina. We have drone attacks on Saudi, but the main story, as you're all aware, is the war between the USA. I mean, the economical war between the USA and China, and that has driven the price of the soybean, and obviously of the soy meal, and also the origin. I mean, as you know, Chinese have moved to South America to buy their beans and their corn also. So I'm not going to go through everything that happened during those 2 years, but it has affected the market and obviously made our market go up and down, depending on the news that we were getting from the tweets from Trump, or from the news we were getting from China. So as you see, I mean, obviously the grain is very important for us, but the balance versus the export of the States versus the export of China is very, very important. So the war is obviously a lot more than the grain, but it's touching the grain more than anything. There's no real resolution of the problem in the short term, but however, in September, things between both countries are getting a little bit smoother. Trump's administration cannot afford to continue the deterioration with US farmers. Neither China wants to depend only from South American products. China has a limited tariff on several $billion of their export products to USA, and Trump has delayed the new tariff structure. China has announced the purchase of USA agricultural products in order to smooth the tension towards the new meeting in October, to be continued. So hopefully things will move, but we have no clear idea. Clearly, I would think that Mr. Trump will have to find a solution before the elections, because he's not making a friend with the farmers with that. One big problem we had this year, which we had previous year also, but not to that extent, was on the shipping and on the lineup in New Orleans. I mean, as you might know, most of the corn and the meal comes from New Orleans. There's no, I mean, you can get it from Norfolk, but it's very small, so it's basically New Orleans. And because of the flood this year, there was no barge that could go down the river, and then they had to truck and train all the grains to the elevators, which obviously was not enough volume to transport for the needs of the export. And thank God somehow the Chinese were not there to load grain. We had some vessels that waited more than 30 days to load, which obviously for our clients and for our factories was a big problem, because no one has, I mean, it is rare that you have 2 months stocks in your warehouses of raw material. And it happened twice this year. In the past, it happened in winter. Typically, winter we would face this type of problem, but this year started in winter, and it's just ending now, and we still have problems now because of all the delay that they have shipping all the cargoes. So it has been a very big problem this year, and we hope next year will be better. But there's one elevator that burned, so there's one less. So we have to see what happens next year, but we have to be very careful with our stocks because we can see it happen again. Another major factor with the freight is the IMO 2020. For pollution purposes, maybe you know, maybe not, but our boats, most of the boats that are coming here are burning two types of gas oil, of fuel oil. One is heavy oil, and one is gas oil. And we run on heavy oil to cross the Atlantic or the sea, and then we have the gas oil only for the cranes, or to heat up the IFO, heavy oil. With IMO 2020, we won't be allowed to use any more IFO. You have to know that IFO is worth about $350 per ton, and gas oil is worth about $700 per ton. So the cost of transportation, all transportation, containers and grain, by the 1st of January, and most likely before, because all the boats have to clean their tanks before the 1st of January. So it will start in November, December, but the freight will go up because of the cost of the gas oil that they will burn. They will have all to go to gas oil, or they will have to put, and that's a reason also maybe why the market on the big boats is very strong now, and I'll talk about it in 2 seconds. They have to put this, what they call the scrubber, which is a very expensive machine that you put in your boat where you can use IFO, but only the big boats can do it. So, to the Baltic Index, which is, like the Chicago for the freight, this month, I think, has hit the highest level since November 2010, most likely because of all of that. So freight, I mean, the cost of our raw material is obviously the cost of the grain, it's the cost, and also the cost of the freight. It's small, but it's still, something that will go up. Now, on the feed market, we have to point out that soybean and corn production and export capacity are concentrated in 3 countries, as you know, the USA, Brazil, and Argentina. On the last campaign, the US export were, of course, very affected by the trade war. You can see the left graph, so I don't know where I am. Oh, sorry, I didn't follow that. Sorry. Here we are. So on the left graph, you can see the drop on the export to China. The first importer in the world was also impacted by the Asian flu registered in China. The disease reduced sharply their feed demand. On the South American side, some export usually made by the USA were made by Argentina and Brazil. The situation reduced US price while it was supporting the South American price. So on the current campaign, soybean production will be reduced because of less important planting area. Moreover, I have to change it, sorry. I'm not familiar with all of that. Yield should not be as good as last year. USDA is expecting again a very high export place from South America in the 1920 campaign, but once again the situation will mainly depend on the trade war evolution. Last weather condition with a dry and not hot climate was favorable to soybean. Harvest should begin in 10 days, but some rain could delay. Concerning demand, the question remained the same, China or not China. In September 2018, USA has sold 10 million tons of soybeans to China, and this year we only had 1.3 million tons of soybean. So, as you can see on the right graph, the drop into the sales. That's just to show you the graph of 1 month, how the price of bean has dropped when the US-China war has started. So in South America, planting will start very soon. as you might know, they do two crops, mainly in Brazil, they do two crops a year. With higher crop area expected, operators are now focusing on weather condition, and dry weather could delay planting. The South American balance should push prices down if USDA forecasts are confirmed, but nothing is done yet. So you see the Brazil soybean harvested area year per year on the left one, and you see the Brazil where they plant all the grain. So the conclusion on the soybean, for now it's still the comfortable levels all remain to be done with the South American crop. So, you know, the weather factor obviously. On the bullish point, the delay planting that could cut production in Brazil or Argentina, and therefore US ending stocks could all of a sudden become tighter. Political uncertainty in Argentina with potential export tax increase. As you know, they have elections coming up, and they used to tax their raw material. Resolution of the US-China conflict that would boost US beans. On the bearish side, non-resolution of the US-China conflict, Argentinian farmers switching area from corn to beans because they're cheaper to produce, and the Asian flu contracting the Chinese demand even more. So, soya meal is bullish. The bullish comments are strong US domestic use, political uncertainty in Argentina, same thing, Asian flu with the pig. The bearish will be US soybean crush pace, a stronger US soybean crush pace, because obviously then we have a lot of soya meal available, because they're crushing for the oil and to transform it in ethanol, I think. Non-resolution of the US-China conflict, and China allowing soya meal import of Argentina, which has not been the case for the time being. On the corn, you might have seen in May, the US market went up very strongly because of the big delay. You can see, I don't know if I can point it, but you can see the planting, the big black line, that's the delay in the planting of the corn in Illinois. And that was a very high concern that we will have a very, very bad crop in corn. So suddenly the market went up, as you can see in the center graph. Now, this provision were contradicted by the USDA, and finally the delay was not as terrible as operator fears, and price decline reverted on April level now. So we have the corn. For the current campaign, there are some different opinions concerning the yields, but even with the pessimistic opinion, the balance sheet should remain comfortable. Harvest just started, and we need to keep an eye on the yield result. The prices of corn are quite good nowadays, and you know, it's really worth to cover if you didn't cover. In South America, planting will start soon, but again, because of the dry weather, we could face some delays. On the South American part, we are in a real weather market, and volatility could increase, as you can see on the South American part of the slide. Same on the bullish side, the yield reduction in the USA, the biofuel package, the production cut in South America, the uncertainty on the tax with Argentina, and the farmers switching to the beans. On the bearish, mild US weather until the end of September, and heavy worldwide stocks. So that's a bit the end of it. There's also something which might change for us in the Caribbean, is that there's more and more corn available in North Brazil. The big issue is that we don't have soya meal. So in order to have a competitive price, we need to bring the corn and the soya meal together. It's a shame because the Brazilian corn is very good quality. We did some shipment from Argentina for ourselves and our clients a few years ago, but Argentina is quite far away, and also we have lineup which are difficult to deal with, and as most of us have storage which are used to from hand to mouth procurement, so Argentina is a possibility, but it's difficult. So New Orleans stays, the best option to buy the corn and the meal until such time North Brazil has production of soya meal. In the very old days, we used to bring this very high quality soya meal that Bounty and Guyana Stockfeed loved from the Amazon River, but it's a non-GMO soya meal, and it has a premium of like 80 or 90 euro per ton. So it's not really interesting anymore now. But the quality was very good because we're like 50% protein or something similar to that. And that's what is interesting with the beans from North Brazil, is that it's very high in protein. So obviously, we have a better use for it in our feed. So I don't know if you have any question. I guess not. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Xavier. I was sitting there thinking, and our colleague from Jamaica started it this morning, and it was also spoken of by Xavier, in terms of the volatility of some of these commodities that we require as inputs into livestock production, especially poultry. And also the fact that we focus a lot on the output side, which is the chicken and the eggs. But in order to get there, we have to talk about inputs. So therefore, I need to throw this out. Guyana seems to have a lot of comparative advantages in the terms of land, favorable climate, fresh water. And if we look at what Dr. Gamil said this morning, looking at the Caribbean as one single space, what is preventing investments from other jurisdictions to come into Guyana to help us secure these inputs? Because we have the comparative advantages in those areas. And I think we need to ensure that that is the message we need to take. The Caribbean is a single space. Guyana has tremendous potential. Let us see how best our colleagues from within the territory can come and invest so we can secure some of the very inputs he has just alluded to in terms of its volatility. I will now go to the next speaker, the next presentation, and I'm going to call to the podium Belinda, who is going to talk to us and she's United States Soybean from the Soybean Export Council, programs in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm going to ask her to make her presentation and to ensure that at the end of the day, we have better perspective in terms of where we want to take this industry. And my thing is inputs. We need to secure inputs. You cannot speak of food and nutrition security without input security. So Belinda, the podium is all yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a very bad time to make a presentation because I'm sure that most of you would prefer to take a nap after lunch, but let's make a deal. You can sleep, but don't snore too loud. You might wake me up. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank many people here for the invitation to make a presentation and to be part of the sponsors of this event. This is not the first time that we sponsor, and for many years we have been supporting the sector, and we plan to continue doing it. In order for you to know who we are and why we are able to provide this type of support, this is a little like a story that I'm going to tell you. Okay, so if you can follow me, and then we'll probably see a video also on how U.S. produce soybeans. Thank you very much, Dr. Desmond Ali and Chris Wilson, for their support, because it was very hard for me to get a visa to get here. Being a Venezuelan, we are very, now we have a lot of impediments to travel to many other countries because of our political situation. But finally, I was able to get my visa and be here. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Desmond. We're going to go through the U.S. mission. First of all, I want to mention that USEC and the U.S. Soy Family is a non-profitable organization. We don't sell anything, we just promote our origin. versus other origins from the South and other parts of the world. So, okay. Within the U.S. soy family overview, we have ASA that most of you probably know. ASA as the American Soybean Association. That's how the first association that represented the U.S. soy family, and it was founded in 1920. Then we had ASA International Marketing. 1956 was opened, the first international office was opened in Japan, in Tokyo. And then from 1956 through 1990, all these logos that you see are from the associations that represent the states that are soy producers in the U.S. So we call them QSSB, they are Qualified State Soybean Boards. So all these states that are soybean producers, they have their own association, and they also manage a budget to provide all the services that we do, domestically and internationally. Then in 1990, the United Soybean Board, that is USB, that we all know them as USB, is a checkoff program. So in all the producers of US soy are part of this board, the United Soybean Board, where they collect a certain amount of money after they sell during the harvest season. Whatever they sell, they have to contribute mandatorily with the sector, and that's where our money comes from. And then USEC, that it was founded in 2005, it's like the administrative branch of all these other associations, and we are the ones that run all the international programs. So here we have more or less what's the mission and function of each of the organizations. We have the United Soybean Board. The mission for the United Soybean Board is to maximize profits, opportunities for U.S. soybean farmers by investing and leveraging soybean checkoff resources. And the function is to increase profit opportunities for all U.S. soybean farmers, research and promotion, and build preference for U.S. soy domestically and internationally. The mission and function of the American Soybean Association is to advocate for U.S. soy farmers on policy and trade, and the function, communication and collaboration with the entire soy family, policy development and implementation, and legislative, policy, and regulatory efforts. So in a summary, ASA is like the legislative branch of the whole U.S. soy farm. And USEC, the mission is to build preference for U.S. soy, and the function is to differentiate and create demand of this product. Okay. How does USEC promote U.S. soybeans? We do it through training, information, trade assistance, technical assistance, and a strategic partnership. What do we do in each type of support? Under training, we provide courses, seminar, workshops under animal utilization and also human utilization, especially for oil for human consumption. Under information, we provide soy advantages, all the research studies that we have done through the year. We always publish it or present it in different events like this event, for example, where we communicate all the findings that we have done during the year. We provide technical assistance, one-on-one assistance to feed and animal operations. We provide trade assistance under purchasing tools, logistics, new soy products, U.S. suppliers, sponsorship of regional events like this one, for example. And in general, what we try to provide is, or to have, is a strategic partnership to get a win-win situation. So you win with the support that we provide to the sector, and we win because you are in the market. Okay, as I was mentioning before, the USB, that is the United Soybean Board, they have their soy checkoff program, and so you can see that this farmer contributes, perfect, thank you. Okay, the farmer contributes with 0.5% of the market price for each bushel sold. Half of this money is used by the United Soybean Board, and half of this amount is used by the qualified state soybean boards, the QSSBs that I mentioned before. How is it used? It's used for research, marketing, and education in both cases. And then you see all kinds of logos here. These are members of USEC. These are U.S. suppliers of either products or services related to the soy family, to the soy world. Okay, so all these companies are U.S. suppliers of either service or products. And then here we have who provides our funding. Our funding comes from the USB, the Chekhov program, comes from ASA International Marketing, because ASA International Marketing is the contractor for the USDA. So together, ASA International Marketing plus USDA, that is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is where our budget comes. And then we also have support from the QSSBs and the industry. The industry are all the members that were mentioned before. A little bit of history on the soy family or soy organization. The first office overseas was opened in 1956 in Tokyo, Japan. Then in 1979, the U.S. opens a Southeast Asia office in Singapore. Then opened in China in 1982. In 1984, the U.S. Soy opens offices in Caracas, Venezuela, and that's where I started working in 1996 with the ASA office in Caracas. It was the South American office, and later in 2001, it was closed, and the operation was moved to the office in Mexico City, and then later moved to Guadalajara. And now our regional office that belongs to the Americas is the Americas Region office. It's in Guadalajara, Mexico. So where are our regional offices from USEC? We have our headquarters in St. Louis, Missouri. And we have regional offices of the Americas, Greater Europe, Middle East, and North Africa that we refer to them as MENA office. We have North Asia and Southeast Asia called SEA, Southeast Asia. Okay, now we're going to talk about sustainability. Sustainability is one of the topics that we have been promoting for a couple of years. Because the way U.S. soy is produced is on a sustainable way. You know that sustainability is a very important topic that is being already talked about and demanded in many countries, especially in Europe. But here in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're starting to show the importance of this topic, because some people say, no, we're still too far away from that, but it's not. It's not a trend. It's a reality. So we all should think about sustainability. So next, before we continue with the presentation, we're going to see a video.
They say that in the next 30 years, we'll have 9 billion hungry people on this planet. What can I do about it? As a U.S. soybean farmer, I'm doing a lot. The world already depends on the soy grown by me and around 276,000 other U.S. soy farmers. So producing our soy sustainably and with minimal impact on the environment, that's something American soy farmers take very seriously. And it's exactly why we've developed the U.S. Soybean Sustainability Assurance Protocol. It's a certified aggregated approach, audited by third parties, that assures sustainable soybean production on a national scale. That's a mouthful, but what it really means is simple. We're promising a quantifiable and results-driven approach to sustainable U.S. soy production. There are 4 key directives we've set our sights on. The first is biodiversity and high carbon stock, which considers wetlands, grasslands, forests, and migratory birds. production practices such as conservation tillage, crop rotation, precision farming, and other technologies. Public and labor health and welfare, protecting people's health and safety in compliance with U.S. regulations. And continuous improvement and environmental protection, which includes conservation programs, information sharing, and technology training. So the question is, how do we make sure we're sticking to all these best practices? Well, with more than 95% of soy growing land participating in U.S. Department of Agriculture conservation programs, we already have a robust data collection system in place. On top of that, there are annual internal audits by producers and annual third-party independent audits by thousands of federal conservation officers. And for our buyers' peace of mind, we offer international certification with shipment-specific record-keeping and documentation for all domestic and international soy customers, that the soybeans and soy products they buy have been produced verified sustainably. U.S. soy farmers are partners in trust to protect the land, generation to generation. We're ensuring a sustainable soy supply for our families and for those 9 billion folks we'll likely never meet. Download your copy of the U.S. Soybean Sustainability Assurance Protocol at ussec.org.
So any extra information that you need about our programs, because our program varies a lot, so we don't have the same programs every year. We have different programs, and it's very, very important that we know from you what the needs are from the market in order for us to apply these needs and apply our support. Okay, so we, the ones that are in the market, we might know by listening to your inquiries, what is it that you need, but it's better for you to communicate directly. These are the things that we need. These are the things that you can do for us. So I want to listen from you. I want to hear suggestions. I want to hear proposals, and we're always open to study them and see if it is feasible to run them. If not, the worst that can happen, we can say no, not this year, not this time, but there is always an opportunity to say yes. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Belinda. We are not doing too badly with time, because if you check the time, it's just roughly about 10 past 2, I think, or 12 minutes after 2. So in keeping with the same vein in terms of making the presentations very compact, succinct, and informative, I would now invite Carlos to make his presentation. And Carlos is from the CIH, USSEC, and he is an expert in trading, especially in commodity, and he focuses a lot on hedging with CIH. So I now invite Carlos to come and make his presentation on hedging grains to deliver cost benefits to feeds. Carlos, the podium is now yours.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, to Desmond Ali, especially the CPA, and all the sponsors and the authorities that are involved in organizing this great event. So I come representing CIH. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. And this topic, hedging, is not an easy subject to discuss with a varied audience. I will start asking among you, who follows the price of commodities regularly? Who is looking in this audience, if they can raise their hand, who follows the price of corn, for example? So all from Bounty Farm, only, so you have a competitive advantage then. Yeah, so not many, I guess, or they are shy, I guess. So a lot of people, perhaps they didn't raise their hands, but a lot of people are probably involved in other areas of the operation. So what I'm going to talk about involves only the price of commodities. So let me explain a little bit about our company first. So we are We were founded in 1999, and the full name of the company is Commodity and Ingredient Hedging. And we provide agricultural services, comprehensive we call them, to different types of businesses. But they all share the common business, which is agriculture. So there are producers, there are importers, exporters, elevators, as you can see, several businesses, including poultry companies. So a lot of our clients are poultry operations, and we help them manage the price of their inputs, the risk they have with the volatility of the corn, the soybeans, wheat, the different products that they use for their production, right? So we're not traders, actually. We don't touch the physical. We're just helping you manage the decision-making process to obtain a better price, or to at least make your business more sustainable in terms of the price. We work in several countries. Our main portfolio of clients is actually in the US, but we have clients all over, including Latin America and the Caribbean. I specifically work with the Latin America division of the company. I'm originally from Venezuela, so I'm very glad to be in this country where we are neighbors, and I never had the opportunity to be here. So it's great that after leaving my country a long time ago, now I have the opportunity, after living in the US, to come and visit my neighbor. So our services are in three main areas. Education is the core. Let me see if this works like this. Okay. So education is the core pillar of our company. I'm glad to see here a group of, I assume, students that have that motto or phrase, education is the best investment. And actually, that's kind of what our company believes too. Because not only it provides us, or it's an investment in terms of progress that companies can make, it's also more business for us. As companies understand how hedging works, how price works, where does the price come from, what they can do, they tend to use more our services. So education is also business for us. And companies, we feel that they obtain better results and they obtain more sustainable business over time. So we have an area of education. We also do consulting, which is our interaction directly with companies like you. And we give them advice. We provide them with technical tools to make decisions. And we're also brokers. So we can implement strategies in the exchange, which is basically the Chicago Board of Exchange, which is the CME is a company, where most of the commodities that you guys use for your raw materials are traded. Mainly, we're talking here about corn and soybeans, or soybean meal. So we can actually buy let's say the protection, which is called a future or an option. That's the technical term for it, for those of you who don't deal with that. We can actually implement and trade that in the exchange. So this is a very important slide because it summarizes the process that we follow with clients and the process of every company, or that we feel that every company should follow in the decision-making process of their raw material decision-making or fixating the price decision-making process. So first we identify the risk, and here we're talking about whether we have upside or downside risk. Companies usually share both upside and downside risk, because whatever you haven't purchased, if the price goes up, you're going to end up paying more. But whatever you already priced and is inventory also has risk if you haven't consumed it, because the price can now go down and your competitor still has the opportunity to buy lower. So both the upside and the downside risk usually coexist in a poultry company. But your main risk as buyers of commodities is the upside risk, which is the one I'm going to focus on. The second point in the process is defining a market perspective. This is where most companies spend most of their time. They dedicate themselves on trying to predict the market. And we're going to show here, or we're going to try to at least leave you with that message that markets are unpredictable. We had a presentation that I'm going to refer to from Javier, where he mentioned bullish and bearish points, or upside and downside points, but there is never a way to actually put an exact weight to all of those factors affecting price. So there is no way that we can make an exact prediction of what the prices are going to do, and that's why we actually do what we do as a company. We hedge. So market perspective is a second step where we define what's our feeling, where the market is going to go. Then we actually implement a strategy, and we have tools where we can simulate what's going to happen before I price my physical right now. How is that going to affect if I price a certain amount of metric tons today, if I cover a certain percentage using strategies that we're going to talk about, certain types of insurance, let's call them, what is going to be the impact in my finances? So all that analysis can be done before making a decision. Then we execute. I said we are brokers, so you can execute with us, but we're going to talk about some strategies that can be executed with your suppliers too, which is something that we see very commonly in companies that are either small or perhaps have some sort of relationship or are in the early process of developing a hedging policy or plan on their companies. They are it's very common to see them doing strategies with their suppliers. So then the last step in all the process is actually controlling the decisions that we made, using tools to monitor what's happening, how the market is changing, and we're going to see examples. But then we come back to the process. So this is a process that is continuous. As the market moves, we continue doing the process because the price is dynamic. It doesn't stay put. Part of the process, or that is important, I already mentioned that we put a lot of emphasis in education, but we actually put it as part of the process is training. It has to be constant because companies cannot rely on one person to make decisions. They need to have personnel that is trained and understands how these markets work and can be able to participate in the decision making. So we provide a lot of training as part of the process. And politics are, I'm not referring here to the government politics, maybe the word should see, it's correct, policies. Where I'm referring here to actually documenting processes for decision making in your company. Let's say an example, company X has a policy of buying all their raw materials 6 months ahead of needing them. I mean, this is a policy, a very simple one, but they can be more complicated, but it's important to define them so that the company can focus more on their operation, the quality, all the topics that you're going to talk about here, and you can rest assured that your pricing decisions are at least done with some policies or some agreement from the board and the directors in mind already. So let's talk about a little bit about hedging, and this is going to be a very brief introduction. Like I said, this is not an easy topic for people who haven't seen this before, but I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. So here is the basic equation of how price is composed, or how price is actually, or what are the components of the price of the physical that you're purchasing. Basically, we can separate what's the price of the future, which is what I mentioned is based on a reference price, mainly for these materials in the CME in Chicago. And then there is a component called basis. So the price, when we show the prices here, if I can show you price of corn in Chicago, it's probably not going to be the same in Guyana. It's not going to be perhaps the same in Jamaica, where they were talking about how easy it is to import from New Orleans. So that difference between your price and the reference price is called basis. So basically, when you sum the price of reference in the CME plus that difference between price, you obtain your cash price. That basis price is going to fluctuate depending on several factors: supply and demand, transportation costs. That was a good example, how close are we to the suppliers, and what's the delivery chain that I'm using, quality. All those things can affect basis. And you have certain control of it, certain. And we're going to see that it's less volatile. Here's what I'm trying to say. So here are the futures only price or graph for corn up to almost today, in the last, let's say, from 2010, right? So we're talking 19 years. So, or 10 years, almost, sorry. So here, so as you can see, this is today. I don't know if it's showing, yeah, I think it is. So I'm very bad with this pointer, but I'm trying to show that today's price. And you can see it's low in terms of the historical prices, right? You can see that those are from 2010. We're seeing a corn price that is fairly low. But also you can see that there were periods of a lot of volatility. Price has been, this is measured in the exchange in dollars per bushel. I don't know, like I said, I asked if you follow the price. No, not a lot of people raise their hand. I assume not a lot of people also follow it in bushels. Mostly metric tons is usually outside of the US. But it can be, I don't know how common it is to follow it here in bushels, but we can do the conversions. Anyway, you can see that it has gone from almost 320, or I can see well the lowest price, to over 8 in some periods, right? It's not common, but it has been as high as 8. And you can see there are several periods where we saw a lot of volatility in prices. This is another graph that now shows the same information, the price of corn in the nearby contract. In red, in this case, is the red line, and the cash price, which is actually the price that you pay in a certain location for a certain product, is the blue line. So as you can see, most of the time in this example, which is I'm using Gulf corn as a reference, it's a little bit higher. Why? I said it: transportation costs, all the factors that are involved, insurance, storage, etc. The green line shows the difference between your cash price and the futures price. So basically, the green line is your basis. And you can see by the graph is in the same scale. You can see that the green line doesn't fluctuate as much as the futures. Conclusion of this: the futures price is more volatile than your basis price. So as a company that produces poultry and is buying raw materials, your focus should probably be where there is more risk, which is the futures price. Not saying that the basis is not important, but you have less controls in terms of hedging on what happens with hedging. It tends to be more stable in general. Let's look at more data here and see where the prices are and why hedging makes sense to companies like yours. So these are the prices up to yesterday or a few days ago. Today, I think they're a little lower. But 383 is the price of corn delivered in March 2020. So we're talking ahead of time. We're looking at the corn that I'm going to have to buy and use for March 2020. That's what we call a futures price, a price that is referenced in the future. And I'm simplifying the terminology, but what I'm trying to say is that it's a little bit higher, or is higher than the price today, because I'm actually forecasting it or projecting a price for March 2020. There is a lot of months in between. So this table tries to summarize if the price is low or high today. You can see, again, the price 383. So the lowest price we have seen in 3 years, I'm going to circle it, has been $3.39 per bushel. The highest price we have seen in 3 years is $4.73 per bushel. So this table, we call it a percentiles table, is using or taking all the observed prices and organizing them from low to high, all the observed prices in a certain period, in this case, 3 years, in the example I'm using, and I'm trying to allocate a certain percentile, or where can I locate the price today in that historical range of prices. So if I take 383, it will be around here where the line is, which is exactly the percentile 33.3. How can I interpret this number? This means that the price of corn for March has been lower than 383, 37.3% of the time in the last 3 years. You can say the contrary, it has been higher than 383, you do the math, 63 or so percent of the time. So this is a relatively low price. Not the lowest, obviously, but it's a relatively low price. Actually, if you look at the 10-year percentile, it's 20%, roughly. So 80% of the time in the last 10 years, the price of corn for March has been higher than the current price. So for a buyer, this is a first starting point of trying to see if the price is convenient or not. So probably as a buyer, you start saying, oh, I mean, maybe this is a good time to start buying some of my needs, or perhaps cover a part of it, because the price is certainly convenient or good in terms of the historical prices. But let's look at another piece of information to try to complement the idea. This is what the price of corn, also for March, tends to do historically in the next months up to March. So the red line is today, and the end of that blue line will be March, when you have the need of the actual physical in March 2020. So historically, in the last 10 years, it's clear, at least from this graph, that the price tends to go higher. This is going to happen, no one knows. Nobody knows. Obviously, you saw all the factors that are still pending in terms of the China-US relationships, weather, the crop in South America is unpredictable. But this is a piece of objective information that is telling me we saw the price is kind of low, or it's convenient, and the price tends to go higher from now until March. So maybe this is another consideration to price part of my physical, or at least use some sort of hedging strategy. So what alternatives do you have in the market? I'm not going to make emphasis on each of them, but you can go to the cash market, which everyone knows, which is buying physical from your supplier. They will give you different options where you can perhaps only price the future, which is called hedge to arrive, price the basis, which is pricing the basis or the contract of basis, do a forward, or price a spot price, which is basically that you go to the supplier and buy whatever they have today and to today's cash price. So those alternatives are fairly known by you, but I'm going to talk about the market that we work into, which is the futures market. So the market basically has two types of instruments to, let's say, cover or do substitute the need of pricing physical with a financial instrument, and they are called futures and options. So let's do a quick difference between them, or differentiate them quickly. So futures implicate rights and obligations. That's a key, obligations. That's a key word when we're talking about futures. When I buy a future, I'm basically locking the price today for a future delivery. like I said, we saw the price for 388 or 383. I can go to the CME or the board or the exchange and lock the price buying a future if I like it. I don't care about the physical yet. I know I'm gonna need it in March 2020, but right now I'm just covering the price of that physical. But I can start today, way ahead, when the price seems to be convenient, and not wait until that possible rise or increase of price hits me when in 2000 or at the end of that period that we saw. So in the terminology, when we say buy futures, we call it long. It's just used in the industry. Short is when we sell them. We're not going to talk about selling them anyway. It's usually the position that is more appropriate for the crop producer. But I'm going to make the difference between futures and options by saying that the options represent rights, sometimes obligations, but we're going to make the emphasis in that they are sort of an insurance on price. So they allow me to obtain a certain maximum price. For example, when I buy a call, the call is the name, one of those option instruments, that allows me the right to buy at a certain price. I make emphasis again on the word. I have the right to buy at a certain price. I'm not obliged to a price, which is the difference between a futures and an option. For that right, I pay a price. I pay a premium, just like an insurance. For what happens with insurance? You pay a premium for the right to be covered against a certain risk. This is the same. Obviously, I'm simplifying the topic because there are several strategies that can be used, and they're not exactly, they don't work as an insurance, but the idea is basically that I don't lock the price today. I just say, I like the price today, but if it goes lower, maybe I want to take advantage and I'm willing to pay a premium for that right. That's how an option works. And this is a graphical representation of those. So here we're looking at the futures, which is in the y-axis, the vertical axis. I'm looking at the net price from the point of view of a poultry producer, which is buying the raw material. So the net price is how much the physical ends up costing me. And in the x-axis, or the horizontal axis, we are showing hypothetical prices for that corn or those futures. So let's say, for example, if I buy a future at 367, so I lock the price at 367, it doesn't matter if the price of the futures goes up to 4. Doesn't matter. Why? Because I already priced my physical, at 367, I priced my future at that level, so my needs are now represented by that line, which is basically a representation of a futures position. Basically, I'm a fixed price now. So if the price goes up, I still pay 367. If the price goes down to 3, I still pay the same amount, 367. Locking the position. This is the alternative, which is kind of like what we are trying to explain more, or because some companies are not using this type of strategies, which is an option. In this case, I'm showing a call option, which is the right to buy, but not the obligation. So I can, for example, buy the right to buy at 370, to buy the corn at 370, as it shows over here. And that will cost, at whatever the time the graph was made, around 15 cents per bushel. So what that means is that now I know that no matter what happens in the market, my price will never be higher than 370, the price I'm covering, plus the cost of that product, of that insurance, let's call it, or call option. So my maximum risk will always be around 385, the sum of 370 plus the cost of the protection, right? So you know that ahead, but the benefit or the difference between the futures, you can see it in the graph, is that the blue line, or the cost for me as a poultry producer, can go down if the price goes down. So I can go with the market and take advantage of lower prices. That's the advantage, or that's the function of a call option, to be able to take advantage of lower prices no matter what. Obviously, as you can see, the price is a little higher for the blue line than the red line. Why? Anyone can tell me why? Up? Why is the blue line a little bit higher than the red line? We pay a premium for having the right to lock a certain price, but the protection or the opportunity to go with the market if it goes lower. So that difference is because I pay a premium. This is the equivalent of having an insurance and not using it. So the market goes down, I was protected, I didn't use it, but I'd still pay for the insurance. So that's why my blue line as a poultry producer will be a little bit higher. That's the analogy I can make. So I'm not going to get into details, but what I want to say is that for every market perspective, there are strategies that make sense. So if I think the market is going up, or it's going to go up, it makes sense to think about pricing part of my needs or buying futures, which, as you can remember from the graph before, is locking the price. So I'm committed to a price. Who will do that? Only whoever thinks that is convinced that the price is going up, which is a very rare situation in this market. I mean, you're never convinced about anything. You never know what's going to happen. So that's why we have intermediate strategies. So if I feel that the market can go up, but I still feel that there is possibility of the market still going down, and I'm willing to pay a premium, I can buy a call, which is the strategy that I just described before, which is generally considered a neutral strategy. It's usually when I want protection to the upside, but I really don't know where the market is going to go, my position or my bias is neutral, we say. And there are occasions where we feel that the market is going to go down. And what does a purchase manager of a poultry farm do when they think the market is going down? What do they do with their physical or their purchases? Usually, they wait. They stay put. They don't do anything, which is valid. I mean, I just wait, but from our point of view, from a hedging company, it's speculative. Why? Because we saw the graph, how the price can be very volatile. So there are strategies that you can use, even if you think the market is going lower. For example, one called the call spread, which is basically, in terms of insurance, let's say we have this hotel and we want to cover it for fire. So we can either buy a policy for unlimited cost, let's say that, not cost, coverage. Let's say the insurance will pay whatever the amount is on the value of the loss, which will be similar to buying the call option. I'm covered no matter what, the price goes up, I know that my maximum price is defined. If there is no fire, I pay the insurance. But if I feel that it's very unlikely and that there is going to be fire in this hotel, if there is a fire, it's going to be contained to a small area because we have very good security measures in place, we can use the call spread strategy, which is basically saying, I'm going to cover the hotel up to $1 million. Not for only the full cost of this hotel, but only a certain amount. And what happens when you do that in an insurance? The premium becomes lower. You pay less because you're less covered. So the same happens with these markets. So I have an example to finish on how a position evolves in time, which I believe is going to be hard to follow now, knowing that a lot of you are not hedging or are not familiar with the terminology. But you're going to see how dynamic this is. And for those of you who do have pricing decisions in your company, you will probably see why it makes sense to use flexible strategies. So this is a hypothetical market, not a particular product or price. It's not historical, it's hypothetical. But it goes from 3 through 550, and we're talking about a period of a year from February to February. So the market starts moving, and we see that the market went up a little bit, and I decide to protect the price because I feel, let's say my bias or my perception of what's going to happen with price is neutral and the price is convenient now. So I buy a call at 4:10 and the market or CIH is going to tell me from the information that we get from the market, how much is that going to cost? In this example, 35 cents. But let's say I'm bearish, which is the terminology for I believe the price is going down. So I can put that ceiling to my protection by selling a call at 5:10, which I know I'm talking here about something that sounds very abstract, but again, this is the same as the insurance example for the hotel. By selling that 5:10 call, I'm putting a maximum to my insurance at 5:10. I'm saying no more coverage if the price goes over 5:10. So that's going to cost me actually, because I'm selling the call, 35 minus 8, which is the income I receive by selling. When I sell something, I receive premium. I don't pay for it. So that's going to cost me 27 cents. So we're going to keep following the cost, and I'm going to go a little faster because the details don't matter. Here, again, the market kept moving. Now I can price how much is each of my positions worth, and they're worth less because when the market goes down, those call options are going to go down. That's what happens to them because that's how they behave. And if the market kept falling, like in this example, now they're going to cost even less. Now the one that I pay 35 cents for is worth 13 cents. But I sold one call option for 8 cents, and now it's worth only 1 cent. So when you sell options, what you do is that you want to buy them low. You want to sell high, buy low. So a good decision right now, and this is where that process comes in, and this is what we do with clients. We'll tell the client probably it makes a lot of sense to buy, again, that call that you sold, because it's only worth 1 cent. How much less can it be worth? 0, okay. But you're going to risk losing the difference between the 8 and the 1, which is the savings that you actually had, by waiting. Probably it's not worth it. So probably you will buy that, and actually that's what we're doing here. We're buying the 1, but we're also, at the same time, we're going to reposition our strategy, and we're going to buy a call. We're going to sell the initial call and buy a call at the current level of the market. Like I said, I'm going fast, and the example or the key here is that the market is dynamic, and we don't make only one decision. As the market goes by, we're adjusting these strategies to my bias. So let's say now that the market is very low, I want to buy or lock the price at 340, paying 30 cents, and now I can sell a put, which is like putting a deductible in an insurance in a way. Or not exactly. I mean, that was a bad example. It's also a way of reducing the cost. Let's say it's going to just allow me to buy lower, but if the price goes under $3, I won't be able to purchase any lower than that. So usually that will be a strategy that someone that thinks the market is going up will use. So the market kept going, so the strategy worked because the market went up. You see that the call option that I bought for 30 now is worth 52 cents. The market keeps going. Now the call option that I sold is worth almost nothing. So whenever something is worthless or a short option is worthless, we usually buy them. So we bought the put, and I'm going to skip the details. The market kept going up, and now, because the market went up so much, I had a call option that initially cost me 30 cents. But now, the right to buy at 340, because the market now is way higher than initially, is worth way more. It's worth $150. A lot of money I have on the table. So what I would usually do with that is sell the call, take the money that I had in the position, and now put another insurance again at their current level. So we sold the call, and we bought another one at 490. And we can keep going. The market's going to keep moving, and then we can take all the gains and losses. Well, first, before we do that, there is a moment where I got to buy the physical. So there is a moment where I actually have to go to my supplier and either price the futures or do it in an account with a brokerage account and give him the futures, and he will give me the corn or the soybeans. And that's what we're doing there. We're buying the physical at the current price of the market, which is $4.51. 51 cents or more, actually like 460 cents higher, or 60 cents higher, sorry, than the initial price when we started the exercise. So the price went up and I'm buying higher. But what happened? Like I said, I was keeping track of all those sold and buy call options, and I ended up with gains in this example of $1.12, rounding. So to obtain the net price, which is the price that I care about, which is the price for me as a poultry operation, I just take whatever I pay for the physical or the futures, let's say, and in this example, because we had gains, I subtract the gains from that amount, and I end up with a lower price. So I actually paid $3.39 for that corn when the market was actually trading at $4.51. So this is not always the case. Sometimes you can end up with a higher price, lower price, average price. In this example, we ended up with a pretty good price. In managing that position, we actually ended up, just by coincidence, in the lowest price that we saw. Who could have predicted that in mid-June we were going to see the lowest price? It's very hard, and that's what a lot of companies are trying to do. And what I'm trying to say here is that there are ways that you can manage that risk according to your perspective by buying and selling options, futures, with the support, obviously, and the education of experts in this area, and can help you obtain a more sustainable price for your business. Your companies are focused on better quality. You have a lot of competitors, and price shouldn't be a headache for you. Price should be something that you manage under certain parameters, and you could use it actually as a competitive advantage. So summarizing the presentation, commodity price is one of your most significant risks, if not the most significant, depending on how you see it. For a lot of poultry operations, raw materials represent 50, 60, 70% of the cost, and depending on what you're including there. So obviously a lot in stake or at stake. And we saw that the futures component of that price is the most volatile part. So that should be where your focus of attention should be in terms of the hedging parts. Options, we saw examples, they're called call and put options, offer protection, but they offer also flexibility. They allow me to obtain a certain maximum or minimum price and forget about what's happening or the tweets that Trump or whoever is sending every day. We can obviously we have to pay a price for that, which is a premium, but it's based on actual market supply and demand. And there are ways to calculate it, and there are objective ways to make decisions in that term. We also saw that hedging, or not only hedging, or every pricing decision should be aligned with a certain perspective of the market. We saw the example of buying futures or physical when we are bullish, or we think the market is going to go up. So if your company has a group that meets and they have market information and they have consultants like us, and your conclusion is that the market is going up, then you should take action, and your positions should reflect your bias or your perspective of the market. So you should be pricing a certain percentage of your needs. Finally, hedge positions, we saw it in the example, which I know can be complicated if you're not familiar with it, but the point is that as the market was moving, I was making adjustments to the positions. So this is one of the main benefits of trading in this market, because your coverage is not static. You can adjust it because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the market's going up and it's going to go down, and you are going to have to adjust to that new reality by those examples or by doing the type of operation that I show. So this was a brief overview of hedging and why we do it. I know it's complicated. I'll be here up to tomorrow, so I'm very interested in meeting with your operations and knowing more about your companies. I know a few of them already, and perhaps showing you the tools and more details about how we work, because this is obviously a topic that can take the whole symposium if we actually dedicate the time that is usually needed. So thank you very much again. Thanks to the chair.
Thanks, Carlos, for a very complex and complicated presentation. But I guess once your money is involved, decisions have to be made. There are risks and there are rewards. You will have to learn the principles if you want to stay in business and not go belly up. I will now move to the next presenter. And the next presenter is Dr. Gary Butcher from Champrex. And he is a poultry specialist from the University of Florida, College of Veterinary Medicine, and who has extensive experience in that he has worked in over 60 countries across the world. And his presentation today is going to be focusing on having a conversation with us on best practices in hatchery management. I now call Gary to the podium.
Well, first of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to the Caribbean Poultry Association for inviting me to speak today to this group at the 6th Annual Technical Symposium in Georgetown, Guyana. I'd also like to express my appreciation to Mr. Brett de Jong from Champrex for supporting my travel to make this trip possible. The title of my presentation today is Best Practices in Hatchery Management. Okay, I think anybody involved in poultry production, especially in the hatchery, know that the bottom line in the hatchery is what? You want to get a good percent hatcher fertile eggs, and you want to produce high quality chicks. I think that's just basically common sense. I can say that in my over 30 years of working with the commercial poultry industry and with hatcheries in many countries, I find that typically the biggest question that we come across when I'm working in hatcheries is there's not really a clear understanding of what is normal. What are normal parameters in the hatchery? Oftentimes, companies do not have access to industry standards. There's a lot of procedures that can be done in the hatchery that can allow us to evaluate many different parameters. And it's important to have this information, because if your hatchery is not reaching the industry standards or the genetic potential for the bird that you're using, you have to try to figure out where the problem is. It's always been my experience that really solving a problem in the poultry industry is quite easy. The hard part in the poultry industry is figuring out what the problem is. We have so many different things going on, and we don't know really what the problem is. We know there's a problem at the end, it may be a lower percent hatch, but we don't know where along the way the problem is occurring to allow us to solve it. So there are many different procedures that we can use to help us to determine where the problem is, and I'll talk about some of these procedures today. I'll try to make this as practical and basic as possible. The information that you generate from doing these different tests can serve us to evaluate performance, and also we can use these as diagnostic and monitoring tools. So I guess the bottom line is, in hatcheries, if you're not getting the percent hatch you want, or you're not getting the quality of chicks that you want, something along the way is not going right. It could start from the breeders, the feed mill, the egg storage, the incubation procedures. Somewhere along the line, something's not working, and we have to figure out where that is. If we're able to figure it out, the problem can be easily solved. I guess just getting to the very basics, to produce high-quality hatching chicks, only clean and well-formed eggs should be used for incubation. I think we all know this, but I guess, again, what is a quality egg? What are the parameters for a quality egg? And we'll discuss this as we go along. Okay, high-quality hatching eggs can result in high-quality chicks if everything is done correctly in the hatchery. If we're not getting a good quality chick, we have to find out why. But again, what is a good quality chick? Do we really know what that is? We can look at a chick and get an idea, but there's a lot of different things we can measure that we can look at to help us evaluate that chick. When you place eggs into an incubator, we know we never get 100% hatch. The chicken embryo mortality follows a fairly normal pattern. This slide right here is very nice because it tells you for each day of incubation, from day 0 to day 21, what is the normal mortality pattern if everything is being done correctly. So if you have information like this and you know what first week and second week and third week mortality should be, if you do some simple testing and figure out where your problem lies, where the mortality is higher, then we can go back, identify where the problem is, and in most cases, fix the problem fairly simply. But again, you have to have access to these standards. Okay, in today's presentation, I want to talk about the different parameters to measure that we should be measuring in all hatcheries to allow us to determine really what is going on. Where is the problem? We're going to be talking about several different procedures. One is we're going to talk about how to determine fertility in your eggs. We can determine fertility by actually breaking out fresh, unincubated eggs, and we can determine fertility by candling eggs at 8 to 12 days of incubation. We have to know what the fertility is to know if the problem is in the breeders or if there's a problem in the hatchery. Secondly, we'll talk about how to assess embryo mortality, malposition, and malformation patterns. And this will be done by egg candling at 8 to 12 days of incubation to evaluate early losses. We'll also talk about how to do hatch residue analysis, the breakout, to help us assess the mid and late mortality. After that, we'll talk about how to monitor egg weight loss during incubation. That is, how much weight does the egg lose from the time it's put into the incubator until 18 days at transfer? What percent egg loss do we have? That's very critical. We're going to talk about how to monitor the hatch window. The hatch window basically is an assessment of how long it takes for the embryos, for the chicks to start hatching out. We want that window to be as narrow as possible for many reasons. If it's not, we need to know if it's not so we can make corrections. Then we'll talk about how to monitor temperatures. We want to talk about the temperature profile exposure of the eggs from the time they're laid until the time they're put into the machine. What happens in between those periods? We'll talk about the temperature of the eggshells inside the incubators, which we'll discuss how to measure those and tell you what the temperature should be. Then we'll talk about the temperature of the chicks after they hatch, when you're pulling them from the hatchers, then from the machines, and while the eggs are still in the hatchery being held until they're transported to the farm. This is the very, very minimum of tests that we need to be doing to ensure that we know what's going on, so if we're not getting hatched exactly what we want, we can go back and figure out where the problem is. And again, I want to stress, fixing the problems is not very hard. Identifying where the problem is where we have our problem. It sounds crazy, but especially for you students, remember that. Fixing problems in life is easy. Figuring out what the problem is can be difficult, and that's a lifelong lesson. So let's first talk about how do we assess fertility by breaking out fresh incubated eggs. Has anybody ever done this? Okay, some have. Okay, and basically, to determine fertility, you can actually take the eggs when they're just produced, just laid. In this case, we're talking about examining at least 100 eggs per breeder flock, and this can provide us with a rapid assessment of fertility. Now, typically, we don't want to go in and break out 100 eggs from each breeder flock and lose those eggs. So this procedure is only done in cases where we need to determine the percent fertility immediately. Because sometimes when we're setting eggs, we want to get an idea of what our hatch can be. Well, if we can assess the fertility right away, we can much better predict what our hatch will be. When you open the eggs up right after they're laid, you'll see one or two things on the yolk's surface. The yolk will be we open the egg up, on the yolk surface on the top, you'll see these white spots. It's either going to be an infertile egg with a blastodisc. This will be an irregular 2 millimeter white spot, like a white clump. This says it's infertile. When the egg is laid, if it's fertile, it'll be about double that size, about 4 microns, perfectly round. It will have what they call as a donut shape, and I'll show you a picture of this in a minute. It's a surprise to a lot of people that when the egg is laid, when the egg is laid from the hen, it's already at about the 60,000 cell stage. So it's undergone quite a bit of development. But there's a lot of variation on development depending on how long the egg is held in the hen. But 60,000 cells is about the average. As you can see here in this slide, on the left here is an infertile egg, and you can see what we call the blastodisc. It's an irregular white clump, about 2 microns in diameter. On the right side is the fertile egg at lay. It's about double the size. It's perfectly round, and as you can see, it has a donut. Thank you, yes. As you can see, it has a donut shape. Okay, and as you can see, this is something you can tell when the egg is first laid. Just immediately after the egg's laid, you can tell the fertility. This is very easy to do. The only thing that's important when you do it is to have good lighting. Okay, now when we talk about hatcheries, we talk about hatch of eggs, we always talk about what's your percent hatch. That's a term we always use. What percent hatch does a hatchery have? That's how we usually evaluate a hatchery. However, if we know the fertility accurately, we can also determine the percent hatch of fertile eggs. Okay? So hatch of total eggs and hatch of fertile eggs. And the example I give here, I think, explains it pretty well. We have 3 hatcheries here, hatchery A, B, and C. If we look at percent hatch of the eggs in the hatchery, hatchery A had 86, hatchery B had 82, hatchery C had 84. From this information right here, I guess the hatchery manager in hatchery A would get the reward, right? He did the best job. Well, the hatchery manager in hatchery B, he might be in a little bit of trouble. Why is he 4% lower? That's pretty significant. But that's hatch of all the eggs. Now, if we determine percent fertile eggs and take that into account, let's look at what happens. If we determine these are the different fertilities of the eggs being placed in those machines, we find out now that actually hatchery B, who had the worst percent hatch of all the eggs, ends up with the best percent hatch of fertile eggs. He's actually doing the best job with the fertile eggs. And I can say that, I'm not laughing about it or anything, but over the years, I've seen a lot of hatchery managers get fired. And then you go in there because they're doing a bad job, but you go in there and find out, the hatch of fertile eggs is very good. His problem is infertility. You're firing the hatchery manager, you should be firing the breeder manager, right? So, this happens quite a bit. I know the hatchery managers are wiping sweat off their head, right? but this right here actually is very important. Percent hatch of total eggs, that's great to know. When I go to a hatchery, I ask you what's your percent hatch. But if its hatch is not good, sometimes we go back in and have to check fertility. And in most cases, or in good high percentage of cases, it's not the hatchery with the problem. They're right on target. They're getting their 90% hatch of fertile eggs, which is great. It's because the eggs are infertile. So just remember that when we're evaluating hatch. Okay, we can also assess fertility and then also early embryo mortality by doing egg candling procedures. How many people do egg candling in hatcheries? Okay, a lot of people do that. Basically, I go to some hatcheries and they like to use these tables with the lights underneath them to determine early mortality, infertility, and I don't think that's very accurate. I think you're plus or minus 3 or 4 or 5%. A lot of hatcheries do that, but in most cases when we go in there and we actually do it correctly, if we get a good candling light, evaluate the eggs individually, we find much different answers. For example, if you're looking at the eggs on a table with a light underneath, you're not going to pick up the inverted eggs. You're not going to pick up a lot of the cracked eggs. But if you do it the correct way, egg by egg, with a good candling light, and you can buy good candling lights for under $20 today, you can get a very accurate assessment of fertility, early embryo mortality, and also you can get a determination of inverted eggs and cracks. And just as another fact here, I would say probably half the times that I go to a hatchery and there's some hatchability problem, we find out that they have maybe 4 or 5% inverted eggs that they're not picking up. Just putting the eggs in upside down. Once you detect that, get that corrected, then their hatch comes up 2 or 3%. I think with some experience now, just a couple hours training and then some experience, you can evaluate over 99% of these eggs as being early dead or infertile just with the light. There's always going to be a couple of them that you have your doubts about and you'll have to open up. But there's a lot of little tricks just with 2 or 3 hours training that you can become quite proficient at this. Now, we all know that you have to have good fertility to get a good hatch. You can't blame the hatchery for hatcheries cannot hatch infertile eggs. So we have to be sure we know what the fertility is. So candling gives us a good assessment of flock fertility. Candling provides a more accurate assessment of early embryo mortality than we would if we waited till 21 days and just did an egg breakout. Also, one of the things you can do with this information, once you determine infertility and early embryo mortality, you can get a very good prediction of what the percent hatch will be. We know nothing really happens during the second week, and then again during the third week, we can fairly well predict what our losses will be. So it allows us to get a good idea. Now, the egg candling at 8 to 12 days quickly separates fertility, which is a breeder problem, from hatchery, from the hatchery problem right away. Where do we go to? Do we go to the hatchery or do we go to the breeder farm to try to fix this problem? This allows the management to focus on the problem area and helps us to expedite troubleshooting. Again, this is a very cheap procedure. For $20, you can have all the equipment you need to do this testing. So egg candling is used to assess fertility and the early losses, the early dead, the middle dead, the inverted eggs, the shell crack, and even cull eggs. So these are the different parameters that you're going to be looking at. This is just a sheet that I put together. It's a very simple sheet. There's many of them available, but this was the sheet that I would use for doing the egg candling. It has all the parameters. It has an area to put all the information that you want to use. So you can go back and identify the breeder flock age, the machine it was in, and so on. And of course, you have to have standards. You have to have standards. To do any type of testing and not know what normal is a waste of time. Bottom line, okay? I know some companies you go to, you'll say, what is your standard? Well, we made up our own. What do you mean you made up your own? If you're using a Ross bird, you got to use the Ross standards, right? You can't just make up your own, because you should reach the genetic potential of that bird if you're doing everything correctly. So this just shows the different parameters by different ages of the breeders. Okay, this right here shows just the egg candling procedure. Very, very simple. And with a little bit, this is kind of actually fun. With a little bit of experience, it becomes quite easy. This right here shows if you candle the eggs, you can actually determine if the embryo is alive or dead. And these are 3-day-old embryos. We could tell which one was alive and which one was dead by the candling. And then we just opened them up to show. And I think that the big parameter here to really look at is, if you look closely, is the live embryo here. You can see the embryos right here, and you see the blood vessel development. Over here, you see the dead embryo, the white spot, and you see the blood ring. So it's very easy to see with the egg candling light. Very simple. Again, this is at 6 days. So when you're doing this procedure, you want to, for every egg you look at, you want your mind to think through certain things. When you put the light on top of that egg, you want to see if that egg is right side up by looking at the air cell. Secondly, you want to see if there's any cracks in that egg. You can see them real easily with the light and get a good assessment. Is there a lot of cracks for some reason? And thirdly, you look for blood vessels to see if the blood is flowing in the embryo. So very, very simple. Okay, now let's talk about how to assess embryo mortality, malpositions, and malformation patterns doing the hatch residue analysis. Now, we talked about the egg candling as a way to determine very accurately the early and middle embryo mortality and the infertility. With the egg breakout at 21 days of incubation, this will allow us to get a good assessment of mid and late embryo mortality and chick quality. So if you want the best evaluation of early activity, use candling. To get the best analysis of late activity in the incubation process, use the egg candling stage. Egg breakout. This just shows basically hatch residue. When it's time to hatch, you go in, you know how many eggs are in each tray. They pull off all the chicks. Everything left behind, you have to account for. If there's 100 eggs in that tray, you're going to know how many eggs in there have not hatched, or how many dead chicks are there, or how many chicks are left behind because they're poor quality. So this is very, very simple. When you're collecting your information, I want to stress this point, just to stress it and stress it. When you're collecting your data, don't put, four eggs were infertile. Always use percentage. Okay, so when somebody comes to your hatchery and looks at your data, you have 22 or 4 chicks or 4 eggs, that means nothing. All the standards are based upon percentages. So we all have to use the same language, the same information to allow us to figure this out. So basically, when we're doing this embryo and embryo breakout, We'll collect the hatch debris from 100 eggs set per breeder. We'll record the number of chicks per tray that were removed. We'll collect the cull chicks, the dead chicks, and the unhatched eggs from the tray, and we'll record these. We'll separate the pipped from the non-pipped eggs. Now, when we break these out, there's differing levels of detail you can go into. And for example, you can break out the pipped eggs, record the number, and you can categorize, if they're pips, you can categorize the malposition or the defect. So in other words, if you pull an egg out of the incubator and it's pipped, that means the eggshell is broken. The beak is broken, the eggshell, but has not come out. That's called a pip. We know that there should be 1.2 to 1.8% of these in the normal hatch. So if your number is 1.8% or less, you're in the normal range. If you're higher than that, then you need to follow up and evaluate the pips more closely to determine if that embryo was in the wrong position or if there's some other kind of defect that we have to evaluate. When we see deformed embryos, we need to also record the number of these. Defining a deformed embryo in a hatchery is pretty normal. I mean, I know in the U.S. sometimes somebody will find a baby chick that has 4 legs. In California, it'll be on the national news as a big deal. But we know in the hatchery, we find a certain percent of defects every day. It all comes down to percent. We have a tolerance of 0.2 to 0.3% defects. If it's less than that, it's considered normal. The remaining eggs should then be categorized as to stage of development. Did they die during the first week, the second week, or third week? And all this information needs to be included in a data sheet. And again, I have a data sheet here that I put together for myself, and it includes all the different parameters that I want to evaluate that we talked about. Cracked, inverted, early dead, middle dead, late dead, pips, dead chicks, second quality chicks. All this information can be put in there, converted to percentage, and then graphed out month by month to see how we're doing. I talked about the hatch standards, and this right here shows for a Ross 308. This shows the hatch parameters for each week of the breeder's productive life. It shows each characteristic by percent. For example, at, say, 60 weeks of age, normal infertiles is 10.21, early deads are 6.29%, middle deads are 0.5%, and so on. So, and as you can see, everything in life is going to be a curve, right? It's going to be a curve like this or a curve like this. As you can see here, the infertility starts off high, gets lower, lower, and lower, and then increases with age. So all these parameters are changing by age. So you can't just do hatch analysis, not know what the age of the breeder flock is, and determine whether or not you have a good performance. I could have, for example, of infertility of 5%, but if it's from a 60-week-old flock, that would be excellent. If it was the same infertility of 5%, but the flock was 33 weeks, we're losing about 2.5% of our hatch because infertility is higher. So we have to know the age and compare it to the standards. If you don't compare it to the standards, you're wasting your time because you cannot make any sense out of the data. Again, this right here, this is a table right here, and I guess you'll have access to these slides online, I hope. But it's just some little tricks on how do you separate the first week, second week, and third week mortality. What do you look for in the embryo? Like, do you look for the tip of the beak? There's an egg tooth. That when you start to see that, that's the end of 7 days. That's the end of the first week, and so on. So there's little tricks to make it easy. Now, as far as egg classification, we have to know what percent of the eggs that are laid are culled. How many people keep information on this? Some do? Okay. We know that in the industry standard, we say that if the breeder flock is healthy and is well managed, we expect to have about a 4% of the eggs laid be culled. That would be the normal range. If you have less than that or more than that, then you have a problem. But 4% is a normal, and we actually put these into different categories to make up the total 4% of the different categories of the culled eggs. So I've been to hatcheries before where they're having really good hatch, but then you find out they're culling 8 or 10% of the eggs laid. Well, anybody can get a good hatch if they're culling that many eggs. Other times they may be culling 2% for whatever reason. Well, their hatch is not as good. Well, yeah, because about 2% of the eggs are making it to the machines, to the incubators that shouldn't be there. So know what the normal cull is, constantly watch that, and if it's higher or lower, go in and find out why. Why is it higher? Why is it lower? Maybe there's a reason. And sometimes there's no reason. It's just that people selecting the eggs select too strongly. We talked about some malpositions and deformities, and some of the embryos simply do not hatch because they are not in the proper position to hatch. Now, what's normal hatching position? For the embryo to get out of the egg, it has to have its spine along the long axis of the egg, with the head in the large end of the egg. Its head has to be under the right wing with the beak facing upwards. If it's in any other position, the chance of that chick hatching out is much lower. So we have to know what is the normal position of the embryo. And I'll show you a slide here. Notice here that the embryo's head is toward the large end of the egg where the air cell is. Its head's under the right wing with the beak facing upward. And this embryo is in the correct position. This is a position they're supposed to be in. If they're not in the right position, your percent hatch will decline, and those chicks that are in the wrong position, if they do make it out of the egg, may be weaker chicks, maybe really weak chicks by the time they get out. For all the different, is 100%, but as I mentioned earlier, 1.2 to 1.8% of the chicks don't hatch because they're in the malposition. And this table here shows the different types of malpositions. Like, for example, the beak above the right wing makes up 48% of the malpositions. The head and the small end of the egg, 7.5% of the malpositions. Feet over the head, 20% of the malpositions. This has all been figured out. So if you have more than you should, if you do some calculations and evaluate what position they're in, look at this table, and you can figure out which of these malpositions are more predominant. And for each of these malpositions, we have a table you can go to that tells you what typically causes that malposition. So, so in other words, if you collect the data, this is very simple to do, no cost really involved, you can solve a problem. Here's the malposition 1 with the head between the thighs. As y'all can see here, here's the head between the thighs. Hopefully that'll come back on. The head between the thighs. Can I have somebody demonstrate? Okay, we need somebody to demonstrate here. I think you kind of need a slide for this description, so unless there's a volunteer.
Just an update. We have some difficulty having the HDMI split into the different screen. We are working to bring this one online so we can continue with the presentations. So I crave your indulgence and your patience. We'll resume it in a short moment. Thank you.
This shows you how important it is to have the chick in the right position. If it's in malposition, these type of things happen. So we want the normal position, head under the right wing, beak upward toward the air cell, the spine along the long axis of the egg. Normal position. This right here we saw before that about normally 1.2 to 1.8% of the embryos are unable to hatch because they're in malpositions. This is normal. This is what you expect. You're not going to get 100% hatch. When it's greater than this, then you have to go back and figure out why. But these are the different malpositions and the percent incidences of each one. We already saw this. This shows the position with the head between the thighs. The head should have moved under the right wing at 19 days of incubation. So it has to be in the right position. Here's the malposition 2. The head and the small end of the egg associated mostly with eggs that are set inverted. You really want to think of the embryo. It's kind of a neat thing, but think of the embryo in the egg kind of like a can opener, right? He's going to get his beak, he's going to hit the shell, he's going to get his wing, push the membranes back, turn a little bit, hit the shell, and do it around the egg. So under the right wing, head pointed right at the air cell, and the embryo can get out correctly. Now, as far as deformities go, I mentioned, when people see deformities, sometimes they get excited. But normally we see 0.2 to 0.3% of embryos that don't hatch are deformed. It should not exceed 0.3%. These are the different percentages of all the different categories of deformed embryos. This would be considered when everything is normal. Now, for example, exposed brain. 29% of the embryos that are deformed have an exposed brain. Without eyes, 25%. Four legs, 10%. So these are normal. This right slide here shows embryos with the exposed brain. See, here's the embryo's head, and you see the brain on the surface. Here's the embryo's beak, his head, and you see the brain that's exposed. Now, if you start doing this testing and you find out maybe you have 1% deformed embryos, and let's say that most of these are because of exposed brain, that's not normal. When you go back and look in the literature, you can find that if the temperature during the first week is too high, you'll get higher levels of exposed brain. So in other words, if you can identify what's going on, the problem is then easy to solve. Adjust the temperature during the first week of incubation, just that simple. Contamination and handling. A lot of people, when they open up eggs, they try to, how do you figure out if the egg is contaminated? Well, obviously, the way to do it for sure is to take a culture to see if you find bacteria. But remember that, when you look at the inside the egg, sometimes the contents are brownish in color. This may not be due to bacterial contamination, but just the breakdown of the blood in the embryo that died. If the egg contents are green or black or have a really bad odor, the eggs are usually contaminated. Eggs that explode are obviously contaminated. They're contaminated with bacteria that form gas, and then the shell explodes. It has a very bad odor. Aspergillosis mold growth is found on the inner shell of the membrane, is also a definitive evidence of contamination. We know that if eggs are allowed to sweat, when the eggs sweat, this increases the chance for egg contamination. So you have to figure out every step of the way, from the time the eggs are laid until you put those eggs into the machine, how often do those eggs sweat? That is, how often are they moved from a cool area to a warmer, humid area? Every time that occurs, the chance for bacterial contamination increases. So figure out if that's occurring and how often. There's ways to correct that. Sometimes you go to hatcheries and you find them sanding or wiping manure off the eggs to make the eggs look cleaner. Anytime you wash the eggs or you scrape the eggs, you're scraping off the protective cuticle so the eggs look pretty, but at the same time, the chances of bacterial contamination are much higher. We know if you work for breeders, you'd like to get as many eggs as you can sent to the hatchery. So there's a tendency sometimes of people, in the breeder farms, picking up the floor eggs and trying to put them in with the rest, or actually really cleaning the eggs. And this may have eggs that look good, but it's a problem. When I go to a hatchery and I look at the eggs in the cool room, and the eggs are perfectly clean, I say that this is too good to be true. You're cheating. The eggs have to have some feather dander on them, or some feather, some dirt. If the eggs are too clean, be suspicious, because that's not normal, and that means the eggs are being cleaned, and that's going to cause problems in the hatchery. Now, what about egg weight minimums? I think most companies here, whether you have your own breeders or you buy fertile eggs, you probably have set an egg weight minimum. And that's something you need to do with your suppliers. What's the egg weight minimum? In most of the industry, it's usually a 50-gram egg weight is not the average egg, but the minimum egg weight that you'll use. A 50-gram egg will produce a 35-gram chick, which is the minimum size chick that you want to use. If you go to a hatchery and they have an average chick weight of 35 grams, that's average. That means half of those chicks came from eggs that were under the minimum egg weight. Some companies will use a 48-gram minimum egg weight, but when you do that, you're going to start to have weaker chicks. Just realize that. What about egg weight loss through 18 days? We know that hatch is optimal when the egg weight loss is about 12%, 11, 12%. It's very rare for us to have too much moisture loss in the eggs, especially in a climate like you have in the Caribbean. But it's more common to have the eggs not losing enough water. If they don't lose enough water, you're going to have poor quality chicks. A lot more of the chicks will have bacterial contamination. This is a very simple procedure to do. Simply weigh the whole tray of eggs prior to setting, and again at transfer, and calculate the percent loss. And clearly, you'd weigh your tray first, then put the eggs on it, weigh those together, get the total weight, and then calculate again at 18 days. What percent are you losing? This is very critical to get a good quality chick. And this also helps you to determine if your machines are set correctly for humidity. Just because your machine says a certain temperature and humidity, that does not mean it's calibrated correctly. And I've been embarrassed and caught many times myself by not properly making sure everything is calibrated. When you look inside the cool room, you have the humidifier to keep the humidity correct, especially if your cool room has a regular air conditioner, because regular air conditioners will actually dehumidify the air. So in some cases, you'll want to have a humidifier. Monitoring the hatch window. This refers to the period of time when chicks are coming out of the eggs. So from when the first chick comes out until when you remove the tray from the hatchery, from the hatcher is called the hatch window. The length is affected by variability of temperatures in egg storage and incubators. If the eggs are all at the exact same stage of development when you put them in the incubators, and the temperatures and everything is very uniform in the machines, the chicks will all develop together at the same time. But if your eggs are not at the same stage of incubation when you place them, or there's hot spots or cold spots in your machine, your hatch window is going to be prolonged. And that really is a disaster. Because if your hatch window is prolonged, that means a lot of your chicks hatched out way too early. So they're going to sit in that machine for a day or a day and a half extra, panting and losing body weight, heat stressed. And also some of them may be not as well developed, so when they come out, they're not ready to come out yet. They're not dried out yet, ready to come out. So typically, the hatch window is calculated from when 1% of the chicks are hatched to when about 99% are hatched. We say the hatch window is usually 30 hours. That's our objective. You do not want to have more than 1% of your chicks hatched out at 30 hours prior to pulling them from the machines. So this is very simple. Go into your machines at 30 hours, see how many are already out. If more than 1%, if there's 5% or 10%, you're in trouble. That means you have problems, and that problem is usually egg storage was not correct, or the temperature uniformity in the machines was not correct. Okay, for monitoring hatch window, check the tray of eggs at 30 hours prior to pulling. No more than 1% should be hatched out. At pulling time, when you pull them out, we say about 5% of the chicks should still be damp around the neck, and the inside of the eggshell should still be moist. Now, what do we mean by damp around the neck? This right here shows the damp around the neck right here. So you pull them out, we should have about 5% of them that maybe still be damp around the neck. If all of them are dried out, they've been in there too long. If a lot more are still wet, that means we're pulling them out too soon. So this is very, very simple. There's a lot more numbers available if you want to check them at 30 hours, 20 hours, 10 hours. They give you percentages for each time frame. Okay, if your hatch is delayed, the inside of the eggshells are very dry. The eggshells can be broken into little pieces very easily, can be crushed. There's lots of meconium on the outer shell surface. And you want to check the chick trays in different locations in your machines. You check the bottom, the top, the front, and the back to make sure we got uniformity for temperatures. So for monitoring a hatch window, you got to set your transfer and pull times based upon what you're finding. You know, you've got to make sure that you don't pull too early or pull too late. But you'll also have to monitor to determine if your hatch window is too wide. And if it's too wide, then you need to go back and determine why. Is it because the eggs were not stored properly? Some are allowed to continue to develop and maybe we're a day ahead? Or is it because we have uneven temperatures in the machines? Now we'll end up here talking about the monitoring temperatures. We'll talk about how to evaluate the temperature profile of eggs, the eggshell temperature during incubation, and the chick temperatures after hatch and during holding. Okay, well, monitoring the temperature profiles of the eggs from the time they're laid until the time they're put in their machine. You want to make sure that within 4 hours after the eggs are laid, that they're cooled down to below 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees centigrade, and they're kept below this temperature until the time for them to be incubated. This is very, very critical. You need to make sure that if inside your cold room that the temperature is below 75 in all areas. If it's 75 degrees here, but other areas it's 80 degrees or 82 degrees, in these other areas the embryos will continue to develop, be more further advanced in their incubation, and they'll hatch out earlier. Hatching out earlier, as we mentioned, can be a problem because the chicks then will dehydrate out. As far as measuring the temperature profile exposure of the eggs, we can also get a probe thermometer and actually stick it inside the eggs internally to see what the temperatures are. In other words, when you take a big group of eggs in on a dolly, we want to make sure that the eggs on the outside surface and on the inside of that pack of eggs are at the same temperature. We want to make sure that when we put eggs in the cool room that we have spaces between the dollies, spaces between the dollies and the walls to allow air to circulate from all directions. We can also use temperature loggers if eggs are going to be shipped. And this right here just shows the group of eggs here. We want to be sure that the temperature of the eggs is uniform and they cool down uniformly. I mean, if the eggs on the outside cool down quickly, but the ones in the middle do not, these eggs will be further advanced in their development, will hatch out earlier, which will make our hatch window a lot wider, which is a bad thing for chick quality. Monitoring eggshell temperature during incubation. The ideal eggshell temperature is 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 37.8 degrees centigrade. After 15 days, the shell temperature is often 101 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees centigrade. Now, when you measure the eggshell temperature, what I use is the little baby thermometer you put in your ear. They're very accurate. You can measure the eggshells with that. You want to measure the eggshell temperature below the level of the air cell, because the temperature above the air cell and below the air cell on the shell could be 1 or 2 degrees different. So know where to measure it on the side of the egg. If the eggshell temperatures get to be higher than 103 Fahrenheit or 39.4 centigrade, this will damage or kill the embryo. You want to check different locations in your machines for eggshell temperature. So this is very simple. Walk in with your little ear probe, check the temperatures in different locations, make sure it's not too high. You want to check the chick temperature, the chick temperature in the hatcher. The optimum body temperatures for a chick is 40 to 40.6 degrees centigrade. That's 104 to 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit. A body temperature greater than 40.6 or 105.8 results in panting to release excess heat, which leads to dehydration and loss of body weight. It's interesting to note at pull time, when chick body temperatures are greater than 41 degrees centigrade, chicks are average 2.5 grams lighter. So just that little bit of temperature elevation from being in the machine too long means that chick will pant a lot, When the chick pants a lot trying to get rid of heat, it also does what? It's evaporating water, losing weight. 2.5 grams for a 35-gram chick is a lot of weight of water loss. So summary, I'm just basically on how to do a procedure. At least 3 trays of eggs should be monitored monthly from each breeder flock to permit graphing of flock performance over time. And we want to graph the performance. We don't want a bunch of tables to look at. We want it graphed to see. The 3 trays should be identified, then weighed empty, and then weighed, and the weight recorded. Then these trays should be filled with eggs, and each one again weighed. That way we can determine the egg weight. These trays should be candled at 8 to 12 days of incubation to evaluate infertile, early dead, cracked, and inverted eggs. And we want to record our candling data. And then these trays should be weighed again at transfer, 18 days, to calculate percent egg weight loss through transfer. We want to know what that is. Very critical. The hatch residue analysis should be conducted on each tray and recorded at hatch time. And all the data sheets should be filled in so flock age, incubator, hatcher numbers are recorded. So you can go back and look at that information to see if there's a pattern. You know, are we having one machine that consistently has a lower hatch than other machines? You know, even though the machines are saying that the temperature and humidity are correct, that doesn't mean it is. I mean, we're assuming that it's calibrated correctly, which is dangerous. This is a backup way to analyze it. The percent for each category for candling and hatch residue analysis should be calculated and compared to industry standards, and any deviations should be investigated. Okay, for the hatch window, examine eggs, chicks, and hatcher at 30 hours prior to hatch and record data. Examine the eggs, chicks at time of removal from hatchery and record data. Determine temperatures of the eggs in storage in the machines, and then the chicks at hatch time. You want to compare to industry standards. I guess I've said that 100 times. You know, we just can't create data and put it in tables. We need to put it into percentages and graphed and compared to industry standards. Communicate results with breeder, hatcher, and broiler divisions, and investigate when results are below standards. And basically, what I want to point out here is that, what I mentioned here, none of these tests we're talking about really cost any money. I think about the only cost we have is a $20 egg candler. If we have somebody that's trained to do this, and in just several hours, somebody can be trained. With a little bit of experience, they can become experts very quickly. Having this information, if somebody tells you our hatch is 2% lower than it should be, if you can go back and you have this information, you can find out where the problem is. Should we be blaming the breeders? Should we be blaming the hatchery manager? Where is the problem? And this is what I tried to hopefully get across today. I assume this information will be available, right? The slides will be available. So all the information and numbers, and I have literally hundreds of pages of data sheets and guides if anybody's interested in these for your program. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary, for an excellent presentation. In the interest of time, we'll move to the next presenter, and I will ask Ivanio and Dr. Nicholas to come to the podium. While they're coming, Ivanio is a poultry specialist who worked for over 30 years within the sector, and he has done so with both layers and broilers, and he has worked across the entire production chain. He has also worked in different climatic zone, hot areas, dry areas, and humid areas across the globe. His presentation would be focused on managing the first 15 days post-batch. I now invite two of my colleagues to now take the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. Peço desculpas que eu não falo inglês e vou contar com a colaboração do Dr. Nicholas para me auxiliar.
Good afternoon, and forgive me, I don't speak English, but with my help, he should be okay. Thank you for this opportunity to present here, especially to Mr. David Fernandes for
O setor agropecuário tem um desafio muito grande de produzir alimentos para uma população crescente em um mundo desafiador. E a cada dia nós temos que superar isso com produtividade, com maior eficiência na nossa produção.
The big challenge we have in the livestock industry is to produce food for population that's growing every day, and to do so more and more efficiently.
Temos uma população atualmente no mundo de 7 bilhões de pessoas. E o grande desafio do setor agropecuário de produzir alimentos com eficiência durante este período para uma população que é estimado em 2050 que cheguemos a 9 bilhões de pessoas.
Just repeated that the big challenge is to produce food for a population that was at around 5 billion in 2005 and is approaching 9 billion now.
E temos que produzir frente aos desafios que ocorrem, falta de energia, falta de estrutura, às vezes, que profia, e os desafios gerais da produção, como intempéries, falta de condições para um bom desempenho da produção.
The slide, for those who could read, shows some of the challenges that the livestock industry faces. Everybody could read, or do I need to? It's good.
É necessário que produzamos alimentos em quantidade suficiente para todos e com qualidade e segurança alimentar. Um alimento livre de contaminantes, de pesticidas, de drogas, de micro-organismos, de micotoxinas.
It's not only enough to produce food, but you also need to produce enough. We also need to ensure that everybody has access to that food, and we also need to ensure the food is safe.
O compromisso de alimentarmos mais de 9 bilhões de pessoas até 2050 e com uma redução da pressão sobre o planeta, pressão de produção.
Yeah. So these are the challenges that we have to overcome to be able to produce enough food for 9 million people on the planet and reduce some of the pressure that the Earth is facing now that is caused by the high human population.
Ele aqui vai passar ali. Com o mundo cada vez mais globalizado, o mundo se tornou pequeno, os transportes eficientes e a possibilidade de produção em qualquer parte do mundo, de chegar a qualquer parte do mundo em pouco espaço de tempo.
Now more and more the world is becoming one village, which is actually an advantage. It lends to great efficiency. There's more communication, transport is easier. So production in one area could easily be moved to another area.
E isso exige eficiência de todos os setores para a competitividade.
Yeah. This lends to competitiveness and efficiency in all areas of production. Next.
Próximo. Bom, o segmento de produção de aves é um segmento verticalizado, bastante organizado e complexo, onde o frango que nós estamos produzindo hoje foi desenvolvido a genética dele há 2, 3 anos atrás. O frango que nós vamos produzir em 2022 já está selecionado nas geneticistas.
Broiler meat production is highly integrated and highly complex. The chicken that we produce today was genetically developed about 3 years ago. The chicken we're going to produce in 2022 is already being developed today.
O segmento da produção de frangos, ele fica inserido dentro do complexo todo, de extrema importância, onde temos a responsabilidade de receber um pinto de boa qualidade dentro da granja, manejar este pinto e despachar este pinto para o segmento seguinte. Depois, fazer toda a limpeza, desinfecção das instalações e seguir o ciclo.
For the producer, what is important is taking that well-bred chick that we receive, giving it the type of management to produce a good, healthy bird, and passing it on to the next sector.
Bom, quando o tema é gerenciamento, manejo de inicial de pinto, dentro de uma plateia que está inserida no processo de produção de pinto, se diz manejo inicial, quem é que não sabe, né? Até o pintinho já sabe. Dentro de um manejo inicial de pintos, é um processo inicial, todo mundo sabe, até o pintinho já sabe.
Yeah. The initial management of the chicks, everybody knows what to do. Even the chick is hatched knowing what he has to do.
Certas espécies, como os mamíferos ou algumas aves, dependem das mães para manter o filhote vivo por um determinado tempo. Mas o pintinho já nasce sabendo comer, sabendo beber, nós temos que oferecer essa condição para ele.
Unlike some other species like mammals that depend on their parents at birth to provide for them, the chick is born knowing how to eat and to drink on its own.
E o que precisamos é oferecer o que a natureza já oferece para o pinto, né? Conforto, alimento disponível, com quantidade, com qualidade, temperatura agradável para que ele se desenvolva bem.
So what we need to do as rearers is to provide for the chick what nature does in terms of shelter, food, warmth.
E o que precisamos de fornecer então para este pintinho? Instalações adequadas, quantidades e qualidade de bebedouros com níveis de água, com disponibilidade, com aquecimento.
So this is what we need to provide for the chick. Good pens, enough equipment, well distributed, clean environment, the correct temperatures.
Porque o resultado final, todos nós sabemos que queremos o melhor, um frango de alta qualidade, com baixo custo, com alta eficiência de produção.
Because what we want is the best result possible at the lowest cost, in the most efficient way.
Bom, separamos alguns itens básicos para comentarmos a respeito do desenvolvimento do pinto, do manejo do pinto inicial.
The slide shows the 8 basic things that are needed during the brooding of the chick.
Instalações e equipamentos, água e ração de quantidade e qualidade, conforto na zona de temperatura, qualidade de cama, qualidade de ar, sanitização, redução de estresse e o fator homem.
Just went through the list. Facilities, equipment, feed and water, temperature, litter, both in quantity and quality, air, sanitation, stress reduction, and of course, the human factor.
Se visitarmos qualquer uma das propriedades de cada proprietário aqui, de cada instalação, nós vamos encontrar diversidade. Cada uma tem uma estrutura, tem um tipo de instalação, um tipo de equipamento, uma condição humana diferente.
So each producer you go to, you'll find a different level of housing, equipment, type of management.
Então, nós temos que saber com o que nós temos na mão. Se é uma instalação de baixa qualidade ou de uma instalação mais simples, uma instalação de alta qualidade, com instrumentos mais eficientes, com equipamento mais eficientes, se é de equipamentos automatizados, se é de equipamentos manuais.
So you have to be well aware what you're working with. If it's high technology housing or low technology housing, the type of equipment, manual or automatic.
Em todos são possíveis produzir, cada um com a sua adversidade, com as suas dificuldades, com as suas produtividades.
Yeah, but it's possible to produce in any one of these situations once you know what you're working with.
Cortinas é um fator importantíssimo dentro de uma instalação para a fase pré-inicial e inicial do pintinho, onde devemos ter uma cortina de fácil movimentação para que seja controlado a entrada de temperatura, a entrada de ar e a modificação de temperatura dentro do galpão com facilidade.
The essential part of brooding is curtains. They should be of a type that are easily managed so that you could control airflow and temperature.
Controle de água e ração de quantidade e qualidade, para que tenhamos um bom desempenho do pinto nessa fase inicial.
You need to have good management of feed and water during this initial phase as well.
O controle da qualidade dessa água, com cloração, com água de boa qualidade, para que o pinto não tenha infecções bacterianas, não traga nenhuma anormalidade para o sistema digestivo dela.
The quality of water is very important to reduce the possibility of the chicks becoming infected by that root.
Alimento também, ração bem distribuída, a colocação de ração no piso para os primeiros dias é bastante eficiente para manter uma boa distribuição, uma boa uniformidade do pinto.
High quality ration during this period is important as well. Initially placing it on the floor is a good technique to ensure that the birds learn to eat and have a high initial intake.
Um detalhe mostrando a importância da restrição de água dentro do aviário, nas primeiras semanas de vida do pintinho, independente dessa restrição ser uma falta de água faltando no bebedouro, ou de nível de água ruim, ou de água quente que o pintinho não beba, mostra o diferencial entre um pinto na primeira semana, que teve 100% de consumo de água, um pinto com 10% de restrição de água, o quanto ele perde de eficiência na vida dele.
Yeah. Very important to note on this table the effects of restricting water from the chick, and pointed out that this water restriction could take many forms. It could be a lack of water, it could be just the wrong height of the drinkers, so the birds don't have access. But what is important, comparing the weight at the end of the first week of a chick that had 100% access to water, to one that only had 90% access, is already a big difference in weight gain.
Sempre lembrando que a água é o alimento mais importante em maior quantidade que a ave ingere. A ave ingere 2, 3, até 4 vezes mais água do que ela alimenta-se.
Water is the most important nutrient, and we must always remember that. The chick would consume 2 to 3 times more water than feed.
Há recomendações de fabricantes, normalmente, número de bebedouros, número de comedouros, recomenda nos comedouros automáticos 1 para 45, algumas empresas recomendam até 1 para 60, um comedouro para 1 para 35, o comedouro tubular, mesma coisa bebedouros nipo 1 para 10, bebedouros tubulares de 1 para 70 até 1 para 100.
These are the recommended ratios for the different types of feeders and waterers.
Outro ponto importantíssimo é o controle de temperatura, a zona de conforto para o pinto. Devemos monitorar na chegada do pinto, durante os primeiros dias, a temperatura de cama, a temperatura do ambiente, a umidade deste ambiente, para que mantenhamos o frango dentro de uma condição de zona de conforto, que é um ponto importantíssimo.
Very important management tool is control of temperature and humidity, so that we could maintain the chick within its comfort zone during the initial brooding stage.
Um ponto importante também, já de zona de conforto, é a monitoria dos pés do pinto. Pintinho de pé frio não come, pintinho de pé frio come pouco, ganha pouco peso, fica desuniforme. E um teste rápido e simples que nós fazemos é, sempre que chega no aviário, pega-se o pintinho, coloca-se o pezinho dele ou no pescoço, ou na bochecha, ou no dorso da mão, que são áreas mais sensíveis para a temperatura, e verifica a temperatura do pé. Se está frio o pé do pintinho, temos que remanejar o sistema de aquecimento ou de ventilação.
Another very important and simple test is testing the temperature of the feet of the chicks when you go into the pen Just pick up a few chicks and put the feet either against your cheek or the back of your hand that are more sensitive. Chicks with cold feet, they don't eat, so they lose weight. If you have a high percentage of chicks with cold feet, you would want to review the temperature in the brooding area or the condition of the litter.
Qualidade de cama, precisamos estar sempre monitorando a umidade, a temperatura, a espessura dessa cama, o pH, para que tenhamos uma qualidade boa.
Litter quality is also important. You always want to check on the humidity, how wet the litter is, the temperature, how deep it is, even the pH, depending on the type of substrate you use for litter, could be important.
A cama deve oferecer uma condição de conforto para a ave, uma boa capacidade de absorção de umidade para que a ave permaneça num ambiente confortável, né?
The litter materials you choose should have good absorbing qualities so it maintains the chick in a comfortable environment.
Qualidade de ar é de extrema importância nos primeiros dias. A tendência de isolar muito o galpão em períodos mais frios, à noite, faz um isolamento muito grande do galpão e deixa a qualidade do ar ruim dentro do galpão. Cama úmida libera amônia, a liberação de gases, e isso provoca problemas futuros de qualidade de problema respiratório e problema até cardíaco no frango.
Air quality is also very important. We have a tendency to overprotect the chick during brooding, especially at night, where we seal up everything. The quality of the air decreases as the gases build up, could lead to respiratory problems in the birds.
Controle sanitário de programas de vacinação eficientes lá no incubatório, na granja se for necessário, limpeza e desinfecção das instalações para que possamos ter um frango saudável no decorrer da criação.
Health and sanitation, also important aspects of brooding, a good vaccination program, good rest and cleaning between batches, and chlorination of water should be practiced.
O estresse por temperatura, por conforto térmico, é o fator primordial nessa fase inicial do pintinho, onde ele não controla bem a sua temperatura. Então, qualquer desconforto de baixa temperatura ou de alta temperatura, ele gasta as reservas de consumo para fazer o controle fisiológico da temperatura dele.
Major source of stress at this stage is thermic stress from heat. Any variation in temperature, either too low or too high, the chicks use the feed it eats to correct this defect, so they don't develop well.
E por último temos o fator homem, que é o responsável por coordenar, por manejar toda essa estrutura. Precisamos de pessoas que tenham empatia, que tenham paciência, compreensão, atenção, observação a respeito e o interesse no cuidado do pintinho.
And the factor that controls everything that we spoke about before, the human factor, most important in this process, it requires somebody with patience and empathy, who's observant and very meticulous in the way he goes about his job.
O galponista deve ter a sensibilidade, antes de chegar no galpão, de já estar ouvindo se o pintinho está piando muito, se está piando pouco, se está fazendo alguma agitação diferenciada.
Even before you go into the pen, you should be observing the sounds the chicks are making.
Entrando no galpão, ele tem que visualizar rapidamente o pinto, ver se o pinto está bem distribuído, se tem água nos bebedouros, se tem alimentação, se tem alguma corrente de vento.
Upon entering the pen, you should observe how the chicks are distributed, if there's sufficient food, sufficient water, if they're eating.
Sentir o odor de gases, se está com quantidade grande de amônia, que afeta negativamente o desempenho do frango.
The smell in the pen, if there's a high amount of ammonia.
Então, utilizar todos os seus sentidos para verificar e acompanhar o desenvolvimento do pintinho.
So you should use all his senses to verify and to accompany the development of his chicks.
O pintinho é uma máquina de transformação de alimento, de ração, em proteína de alta qualidade.
The chick is a very efficient machine in converting food and protein
Nós saímos de um,
quickly.
desculpa. Nós saímos de um frango, um pintinho de 40 gramas, com 45 dias, chegando a 3,2 kg. Ele aumenta em 80 vezes, nesses 45 dias, ele aumenta em 80 vezes o seu tamanho.
In 45 days, it increases its size 80 times.
Ok? Trabalhamos com um frango, que queremos um frango que tenha 72 gramas de ganho por dia.
During this period, it gains about 72 grams per day, which translates into 3
Representa
grams per
3
hour.
gramas. Isso representa 3 gramas de ganho de peso por hora, com consumo com menos de 6 gramas por hora. Ou seja, uma transformação de alimento muito grande.
And it eats about 5.3 grams in that hour to produce 3 grams of weight.
E nessa fase que estamos tratando, a fase de 1 a 14 dias, é a fase de maior eficiência dessa ave. Uma ave que sai de 42 gramas e tem potencial de chegar a 210 gramas em 7 dias, um aumento de 5 vezes o seu tamanho inicial.
Yeah. This initial 7 days is the most efficient stage in the chick's life, where it converts from 42 grams body weight to 210 grams, which is 5 times the weight it started out at.
E com uma eficiência de transformação muito grande, que este frango come um volume menor do que ele ganha de peso aqui. Assim. Um frango que com 7 dias come em torno de 150, 170 gramas e ganha 170 gramas de peso. Então, com uma conversão de quase 1 para 1.
Yeah. It's the only stage in the chick's life where the feed conversion is about 1 to 1.
Então, é uma fase que há necessidade de muita preocupação com o manejo e com a alimentação e com todos os cuidados, porque é uma fase que este frango vai desenvolver todo o sistema de imunidade dele, o sistema digestivo está desenvolvendo em grande velocidade e vai ser muito importante na fase de engorda e crescimento e final deste frango.
So this stage is really important in the chick's life, this initial stage, initial 7 days, because the digestive system and the immune system is developing at a very rapid rate. And these two factors would affect the chick's growth or the bird's growth in the finishing stage.
Essa fase de 1 a 14 dias, há 2 décadas atrás, nós tínhamos um frango de 70 dias, ele representava 20% da vida do frango. Hoje, um frango com 42 dias, de 1 a 14 dias, representa 33% da vida deste frango. Há 2 décadas, o frango com 70 dias, 14 dias, representava 20% dele. Hoje já representa 33% essa primeira fase de 14 dias aqui.
Okay. Two decades ago, 14 days in a bird's life represented 17% of the bird's growth. Now, today, it's 33%.
E com o consumo de 11% do total de ração que ele consome durante a vida dele. Então é uma fase que ele representa muito percentual da vida dele e com um consumo bem reduzido, porque é uma fase que ele tem um retorno muito grande.
And even though it develops 33% during this phase, it only consumes 11% of the total ration it would consume in its lifetime. So it's very efficient at this phase. It's worth investing in this phase of the bird's life.
O frango dos próximos anos vai sair com 35 dias. Isso, a primeira fase, de 1 a 14 dias, vai representar 40% da vida do frango. O frango, daqui a poucos anos, vai sair com 35 dias e os 14 dias vai representar 40% da vida dele.
And in another decade or so, 14 days is going to represent 40% of the bird's development because the genetic research is ongoing.
Então, cada vez mais a preocupação com essa fase inicial do frango para que ele consiga ter um ótimo desempenho para que tenha um retorno final.
He's saying all of this just to help you realize why this first 14 days of the bird's life is so important.
Nós passamos um período grande, até 16 meses, produzindo um ovo com qualidade, com estudo de genética, com melhoria do frango. Levamos para um incubatório com 21 dias de incubação e temos um transporte que vai do incubatório até a granja, que leva de meia hora, 1 hora, 2 horas.
So, about 16 months were invested in developing a breeder to lay this egg that goes to the hatchery for 21 days. From the hatchery to your farm would be between 1 to 2 hours.
E às vezes esse tempo de 1 a 2 horas não é dada a devida atenção. Transportamos sob condições inadequadas e esse pintinho já sofre lá no incubatório no período de nascimento. O período normal, nós vimos agora há pouco, um período de incubação normal de 504 horas. A gente tem trabalhado para se ter um frango de 1.000 horas.
Within that 1 to 2 hours of transport, you could already start doing damage to the chick if you don't pay enough attention to the conditions under which you're transporting the chick. You must remember too, the chick is already stressed. Some of them hatch several hours before the hatch was complete, so they've been fasting all that time. On top of that, you have all the stress of sorting, vaccination, sexing them, boxing them off before transport.
Ok, então ele sofre já os pintinhos que nascem antes dessas horas aqui permanecem na máquina por longo tempo esperando que o restante dos pintinhos nasça. Então ele já sofre um pouco de intempérie, de condições ruins dentro do galpão, do incubatório. Depois sofre o processo de vacinação, de sexagem, de embalagem e depois para o transporte para chegar na granja, né?
Yeah, so those chicks that hatch early are already stressed.
E esse transporte, se não for eficiente, se não tiver uma condição adequada de ventilação, de umidade, as mesmas condições que ele recebe ou dentro do incubatório ou dentro da granja, então num curto período de tempo você consegue estragar todo um trabalho que foi feito de uma cadeia toda e prejudicar todo um resultado final.
So if your mode of transport doesn't offer all the conditions the chicks require in terms of temperature and hydration and so on, you could spoil a whole chain of work that was done and spoil the results you get as well.
Então o pinto sofre desidratação, perda de peso, retardo do crescimento, menor resistência a infecções, menor desenvolvimento e alta mortalidade.
So those are the effects of poor transport facilities on the chick.
Bom, esse fator, esse complexo de coisas todas, a gente chama de crime fisiológico, que é o tempo entre o nascimento e a chegada na granja.
Yeah. Within the sector, that window between the hatchery and arriving at the farm is normally called a physiological crime because of what the chick is made to go through.
Então o desafio é a gente monitorar esse transporte desde a saída do incubatório, o tempo que permaneceu sendo transportado e como foi as condições desse transporte até chegar na granja.
So we should always be conscious of the time between hatching and arrival to the farm and the conditions under which the chick arrives to the farm.
Muitas vezes essa perda é invisível, mas é irrecuperável também, porque depois que o pintinho desidratou, perdeu qualidade de formação intestinal, nós não conseguimos recuperar no curto espaço de tempo.
Many times the effect of this transportation is not even visible or noted, but it's an irreversible effect.
Por isso, tem se desenvolvido a cada vez mais alimentações de forma diferenciada para que faça com que esse pinto ingira a ração o mais rápido possível. Hoje tem já trabalhos e alguns tratamentos com a alimentação intra-ovo.
So that's why, in terms of nutrition, rations are becoming more and more specific for periods or phases in the chick's life. They're even experimenting now with feeding the chick while it's still in the egg.
Alguns nutrientes são injetados no ovo no 17º, 18º dia de vida dele.
Nutrients are injected into the egg around the 18th or 19th day of incubation.
Hoje muitas empresas já trabalham com a alimentação pós-eclosão, onde a ração é colocada na caixa do pinto dentro do incubatório, antes de ir para a granja.
Right? They're also working with feeding the chick while it's still in the hatchery.
E a nutrição pré-inicial normal para os 168 horas iniciais do pinto, que são os 7 primeiros dias de vida dele, que é a alimentação com a ração pré-inicial.
And now now pre-starter rations are common, which are given during the first 7 days of the chick's life.
Nessa fase que o pinto acaba de nascer, até chegar na granja, é uma fase que a gente chama de transição metabólica, onde o sistema digestivo dele está ainda terminando de se formar e ele vai receber a primeira alimentação via oral.
The growth rate of the digestive system during this period of time is way ahead of the rate at which the rest of the body is growing.
E nesses primeiros 168 horas, que são 7 dias, nós chamamos de um crescimento alométrico, onde o intestino chega a crescer em peso 8 vezes mais do que o crescimento normal do corpo.
This phase is called allometric growth, where the intestines grow at a rate 8 times faster than the rest of the body.
E o quanto mais rápido a ave recebe essa alimentação, mais rápida ocorre a maturação do sistema digestivo, a liberação de enzimas, a absorção do saco vitelino, para que ocorra um desenvolvimento mais rápido de toda essa estrutura e inicie a digestão.
So the faster we get the food to the chick, the faster the organs will grow and develop, the faster it would use up the yolk sac reserves, and the faster the entire digestive tract would mature.
Bom, aqui é um exemplo do crescimento que a gente chama de crescimento alométrico, onde os intestinos crescem numa velocidade de 7, 8 vezes mais rápido do que o desenvolvimento corporal.
The graph is describing the allometric growth we spoke about, where the intestines grow at a rate about 7 to 8 times faster than the rest of the body.
Então, são fotos de pintinhos de 1 dia de idade, pesando em torno de 45 gramas, frango de 7 dias com 185 gramas, frango de 14 dias com 510 gramas, e os intestinos do pinto de 7 dias, de 14 dias e de 1 dia, mostrando o desenvolvimento de cada tipo de intestino.
This photograph demonstrates the development of the intestinal tract for chicks at various ages.
Bom, e o que precisamos de fazer para toda essa situação é de manter o conforto em todas as condições para esse pintinho. Conforto de temperatura, conforto de umidade, conforto de ventilação, conforto de qualidade de ar, para que ele tenha uma boa uniformidade e um bom desenvolvimento.
So, like we said in the beginning, we need to provide everything the chick needs so that it could perform at its best in terms of lighting, water, good air quality, right temperature, feed.
Algumas falhas que costumamos ver dentro das granjas são um sistema de aquecimento externo ao galpão, onde se coloca a lenha e uma ventoinha toca o ar quente para dentro do aviário.
Some heating systems, the first one is a furnace. It works with firewood. The firewood is burned in that piece of equipment you see there, and then the hot air is blown into the pen by fans.
É um equipamento mais moderno, em relação a um equipamento de menor capacidade de funcionamento, mas todos os dois funcionam bem se bem manejado. Quando mal manejado, todos eles trazem problema.
The furnace, of course, is a little bit more advanced than the other two pictures, which just burns the firewood open in barrels, but both of them work well if managed properly.
Então aqui é um pintinho que está sofrendo de frio e gastando as suas reservas energéticas para manutenção de temperatura, ao invés de estar ganhando peso.
The picture on the bottom right shows cold chicks So they're using up their energy to keep themselves warm instead of using it to grow and develop.
Bom, o aquecimento é importante também de tomar cuidado. Aqui é uma chaminé de uma das fornalhas, passando perto do sistema de água. Então, água quente, o pintinho também não bebe água. Fumaça dentro do galpão traz grandes problemas também do sistema respiratório, sistema cardíaco, para este frango desenvolver.
All right, the picture on your left shows a pen with a lot of smoke in it, so poor air quality would affect the chicks' development and cause respiratory trouble. On your right, you see the water line passing right next to the chimney of the furnace, so the water would get hot, the chicks won't drink.
Excesso de pinto dentro das instalações, ou seja, um manejo inadequado de soltura do pinto faz com que você tenha menor qualidade de uniformidade e problemas de locomotores na fase final desse pinto também.
Overstocking of the pen, right, would cause uneven growth, cause poor litter quality and leg problems.
A temperatura deve ser uniforme por dentro de todo o galpão, seja qual for o sistema de aquecimento.
You should have a uniform temperature within the brooding area, regardless of what system you're using.
Repetindo, qualquer tipo de temperatura inadequada, esse pinto amontoa, perde peso, desidrata, perde uniformidade e perde velocidade de crescimento.
Another example of incorrect temperature, you see the chicks grouping up, they lose weight, you have uneven growth.
E essa condição aqui não é difícil de se ver, mesmo em condições de clima quente. Chega na madrugada, um dia de chuva, qualquer coisa aqui assim, se o aquecimento não está próximo, o pinto sente e amontoa.
You shouldn't think that something like this won't happen here because we're in the tropics. But on a rainy day or early in the morning, if there's mist or dew, it's quite possible that we have this situation.
Da mesma forma que baixo aquecimento é prejudicial, o alto aquecimento, o pinto sai debaixo do aquecimento, mas ele sofre também com o calor e sofre os mesmos problemas de baixo desenvolvimento e desuniformidade.
Yeah. Too high temperatures is just as bad as too low temperatures. What happens? The chicks move away from the heat source. They don't eat, and so you have the same result: poor growth, uneven growth, and poor development.
Qualidade de água, qualidade e quantidade de água é imprescindível, como já falamos. Monitoria desta água com medição da cloração. É importantíssimo mantermos um cloro entre 3 e 5 ppm no bico da ave.
The quality and quantity of water, like we said before, is of paramount importance, and so we should always be checking the level of chlorine in your water.
Qualidade de água ou água maltratada, você tem passagem de micro-organismos, traz diarreia, traz problema de cama, de qualidade de cama e maior condenação no abatedouro.
Poor quality water leads to chicks getting infected, having diarrheas, you get poor litter quality, and more condemnations at the abattoir.
Com relação ao manejo de água também, às vezes há um investimento muito grande de uma instalação de alta tecnologia e depois coloca uma caixa d'água exposta ao sol e às vezes até a tubulação está exposta ao sol aqui, fazendo com que a água chegue no bico do pintinho quente.
The first picture is a good example of having nice new high-tech facilities, but you have the water tank exposed to the sun. So the water heats up and you get poor performance even though you have the best of facilities.
Então é importante proteger a fonte de água. Ocorre uma diferença de temperatura, dependendo da região, a água protegida aqui com 25 graus, com a temperatura externa aqui de 45 graus.
So you don't need to have fancy installations, very simple facilities. On the right you see a picture where the outside temperature is 45 degrees and the water in the tank is 25 degrees.
E sempre lembre, o pinto tem um termômetro na ponta do bico. Quando ele coloca o bico numa água quente, ele molha o bico e não bebe.
said the chick's beak is a thermometer. When he sticks his beak in the water, if it's too hot or too cold, he won't drink it.
Com relação a espaço, nós temos trabalhado muito com uma liberação de espaço muito rápida. Há uma tendência, às vezes, do produtor de ficar segurando muito o pinto dentro de um espaço reduzido. Isso faz com que a cama fique de baixa qualidade, o espaço, a densidade fica alta, a disponibilidade de equipamentos para ele fica ruim. Então, nós temos trabalhado com essa colocação de com 7 dias, 8 dias, ele esteja em 50% do aviário.
Nowadays, we work with very rapid expansion of the space given to the chicks. Long ago, there was a tendency to hold the chicks close for a longer period of time, which used to result in the quality of the litter deteriorating. And the chicks didn't have enough access to feed and water. So now this is what is recommended. By the 8th day, they should be in half of the pen.
E do 8º dia ao 12º dia, esse pinto já esteja solto no aviário todo.
Right? And sometime between the 8th and the 12th day, they should be at full pen.
Com isso você mantém uma melhor qualidade de cama, não fica aquela cama empastada, molhada na fase do pinteiro e diminui o risco de pinto de pé frio, né, e melhora a disponibilidade de equipamento para ele.
That way you have better litter quality, better access to feed and water, less problems with bad feed.
Bom, equipamento é preciso que esteja dentro do aviário e esteja disponível. Equipamento com bebedouro sem água, bebedouro com nível errado, e tudo isso vai trazer vai trazer uma restrição de alimentação ou de água para o pinto e vai aumentar a competitividade. Um bebedouro, um comedouro faltando, vai ter disputa para mais aves dentro dos outros comedouros que estão presentes.
It's not just enough to have enough equipment in the pen. The bird should also have access to the equipment. So you shouldn't have waters that don't have water in them or they're the wrong height, that the chicks can't get it. What that would result in is a higher competition for the waterers and the feeders that have feeder water in it.
Mesma coisa, cama de baixa qualidade, cama úmida, o pinto fica todo sujo, mas o importante é que ele fica de pé frio, fica com má alimentação e entra num quadro de diarreia e entra em desuniformidade e o resultado vai ser refletido lá no final.
Here's an example of poor quality litter. The chicks get cold, they end up with diarrhea, and you get a poor result at the end of the crop.
Fumaça é extremamente prejudicial ao sistema respiratório da ave, ao sistema cardíaco e muitas vezes no sistema de fornecimento de aquecimento, com lenha, com carvão ou com o querosene, que tem alguns usos aqui, traz grandes problemas para a qualidade do pinto.
Smoke is very bad for air quality, and most of the traditional methods of heating that use either firewood or charcoal or kerosene produce a lot of smoke. So it's something we got to watch at. It affects the bird's respiratory system.
Então, o problema de ascite pode estar relacionado com fumaça dentro do galpão, além de outras possibilidades, mas a fumaça dentro do galpão pode trazer problemas de ascite, que aqui é um corte do coração, onde um coração normal e um coração de um frango com ascite, onde há uma dilatação do ventrículo direito dele.
This is one of the effects of smoke on the bird, ascites. And the picture shows a cross-section of the heart of a normal bird and the heart of a bird with ascites.
Bom, o pintinho, como já falamos, é importantíssimo que ele receba a alimentação o mais rápido possível. Então, quando chega na granja, ele tem que ter alimento disponível, seja dentro de comedouro, seja em cima de papel, seja em cima de uma sacaria, para que ele receba o alimento o mais rápido possível.
It's very important that the chick receives food as soon as possible when it arrives on the farm. It should arrive at the farm with food already available to it. be it in a chick feeder, on the ground, on paper, whatever means, but it's most important that food is available.
O pintinho, quando nasce, ele tem uma reserva do saco vitelino rico em gorduras e proteína. Essa proteína é de alta qualidade, de anticorpos, e ele precisa de aproveitar isso para a imunidade, não para ganhar peso ou ganhar tempo de vida dentro do galpão.
When the chick hatches, it has the yolk sac reserve. It's high in fats and protein, but this protein is very high quality protein and it's used for immunity. It shouldn't have to use it for its own growth and maintenance.
Então, esse saco vitelino ele é pobre em energia e o pintinho, nas primeiras horas, se fica sem alimentação, ele entra num quadro de hipoglicemia, num quadro de letargia, chama o pinto dorminhoco, o pinto sonolento dentro do galpão, e isso causa refugagem e causa mortalidades.
The result of the chick not having access to food, it goes into a state of hypoglycemia, lethargy, and eventually it will die.
Um ponto importante é a checagem do pintinho às 24 horas depois de alojado. A gente deve pegar 100 pintinhos e observar a quantidade de alimentos no papo. Pelo menos 95% dos pintinhos deve estar com água e alimento em quantidade e qualidade. Ou seja, o pintinho, quando você pega o papinho dele aqui à esquerda, a gente tem um pinto... Aqui à esquerda temos um pinto com o papo cheio, e aqui um pinto com o papo vazio.
24 hours after placing the birds, you should do the chick check to see how many of them have had access and have eaten food. The bird on the left has a full crop, the one on the right has an empty crop. At 24 hours, at least 95% of the birds checked should have food and water in their crop.
E deve ser observado que ele deve estar com o papo cheio e macio. O pinto de papo cheio e duro significa que ele comeu e não bebeu água. O pinto de papo muito mole e cheio significa que ele bebeu muita água e não comeu.
We must note that the crop must be full and soft. If the crop is just full and hard, it means it's eating but not drinking. If it's full and very, very soft, it's drinking and not eating. So you need to be sure that it's both eating and drinking.
Aqui é só um exemplo que é possível criar em condições adversas, em galpões de baixa tecnologia. Um frango, um quadro real, um frango de 7 dias, 230 gramas de peso.
This is an example that you could raise good birds in very simple installations. Under these conditions, you have a bird at 7 days weighing 230 grams.
Bom, o importante é que na criação de frango nós não fiquemos no chamado automático, onde você entra no galpão e lava o bebedouro, coloca a ração e vê se tem a temperatura e sai do galpão e não observa, não tem sensibilidade, não tem um acompanhamento do dia a dia do pintinho.
In conclusion, it's important not to fall into automatic mode where you go into the pen, throw feed, check the water, pick up the dead chickens and then leave. You should be very observant, identify problems and solve them.
Devemos investir em treinamento de equipe, em incentivos sobre resultados para os funcionários.
You should invest in your workers, pay incentives for good results.
Manter um checklist para que se possa acompanhar o dia a dia, cada etapa do pintinho, do frango, para que se faça a verificação.
Over time, you should develop a checklist of activities and things to do and use it, follow it.
E é a fase mais importante na vida do pinto. É uma fase curta, de 14 dias, representa um percentual grande na vida do pintinho e ela deve ser bastante cuidadosa. É uma fase que vale a pena investir nessa fase do pintinho, na alimentação, nos cuidados, no manejo, porque ela é quem vai refletir o resultado final. Se não iniciar com um bom desenvolvimento do pintinho, um bom crescimento intestinal, uma boa imunidade, esse pinto não vai trazer retorno na fase final.
It's a very important phase in the bird's life, and we should invest in it. It's the time when the intestinal tract develops, when the immunity develops, and it affects the result at the end. Even though it's just a short period of time, it's very important in what we get at the end. So it's worth investing in this brooding phase.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicholas, for your translation, interpretation, and some of your touch into what was said. We are actually coming down to the end of today's activity. However, I would invite Dr. Ali to come and do some house cleaning. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Well, I'm very pleased to see that everyone's still here, and I'm particularly pleased that our students are still with us this afternoon. And that tells me that we've had a very interesting and informative day's proceedings. I'm not going to attempt to sum up what happened today. We'll do some of that tomorrow. If there are any urgent questions or comments that anybody wants to make, please feel free to do so now. While I want to make two announcements. The first announcement is that we have a website. It's www.caribbean-poultry.org. I'm going to have that on my presentation tomorrow. It's www.caribbean-poultry.org. If you click on DocuCenter on that website, you will see all of the presentations of all of the symposia that we've done to date, the entire 5 that have gone. There's a lot of other information on the website. I put up, every single day I do communicate to my members of the grain prices, cash prices, and futures. And I do an 8-line summary of the financial situation in the world that will affect what the prices of grain will be in the short to medium term. If any of you would like to get a copy of that communique on a daily basis, just give me your email address. I'll put it on my address book, and I'll send that out to you. But I do put it on the website every single day that I do it, and I do that every day, except occasionally, like today, I didn't have the time to do it. But it's normally done early in the morning, as I try to catch the markets as they open, the stock markets as they open in the US, and I summarize what's happening in the Far East, in Japan and Australia and China and India, and I move west, showing people what's happening financially and also in terms of the chicken and livestock industries. So that gives you an idea of what's going to happen to prices of grains, because I'm very concerned about the prices of grains. Since grains make up about 65% of the price of the bird at a farm gate. So if any of you would like to get a copy of that, as I do it, give me your name and email address, or you can read it on the website. Regarding the symposium proceedings for this symposium, we shall be doing a complete thumb drive that will contain all the presentations as well as the videos, and the videos of tomorrow and tomorrow evening. We may not have the jump drives available to distribute tomorrow evening because we'll need to do some editing on Saturday. We'll certainly have them ready early next week. And while we may not be able to distribute jump drives to everyone because you would have left, we intend to send a few by FedEx or one of the couriers to the various countries, and we can have those. We'll let you know where they are, and you can copy them there or do what you like with the wherever the jump drives are. But everything is going to be on my website. I will probably get a jump drive myself sometime next week, and I'll try to put it onto the website by the end of not by the end of next week. I have to be in Belize next week for the COTED meeting. So the week after the 8th of October, I'll put the information on the website so they will all be available. But we'll also be doing the jump drives, which will be available for distribution sometime early next week. I want to mention to the board members of the Caribbean Poultry Association that our 35th board meeting is going to be held tomorrow morning at 7:30 under the chairmanship of Peter De Freitas. The meeting room for that is at the back of the dining room. There's a room at the back. Well, I don't know if it's the back or the front, but that way, if you walk towards the Huh? The west, okay. At the west of the dining hall, there's an attractive room set out, and the board members of the CPA will be meeting there tomorrow morning. We'll probably meet for about 2 hours, hopefully finish by 9 or 9:15. So we'll come up here for the session that begins tomorrow morning, just after 9. Members of the CPA who are not board members and wish to attend the meeting, you are more than welcome so to do, because then you'll understand how the board operates and what are the issues that the board is dealing with at the present time. As I did mention earlier, we do have 2 board meetings a year, one in September, which is the one we're having now, and we do have another one in January at the same time that we have the annual general meeting. So we have 1 annual general meeting and 2 board meetings a year. So I want to thank you all for remaining today. We've had a number of very interesting presentations. In fact, when I think of all the symposia we've done, the first day and both days have been always very interesting. We've had very, very good presentations. I'm glad we had Gary here again. We had him last year, and Gary did a very great job. Quite a few of Gary's presentations actually are on the website already. I know Gary spoke about them, and we do have many of those presentations on the website there. We have a number of presentations from the Belize meeting, for those of you who are interested, on microbiome, on the microbiome of the bird, because that, we are not covering that today because we did that a couple of years ago, but the microbiome and the constitution of the microbiome plays an important role in nutrition and the performance of the chick. So for those of you who are interested in microbiology and the microbiome of the chick, those presentations are in the Belize symposium, which was held year before last. Last year it was in Paramaribo, and the year before was in Belize, and we dealt at length with the microbiome of the chick. So that's all I wanted to say for this. I want to thank you all again for coming. Look forward to seeing all of you, and especially the students, tomorrow morning for the session which begins at 9 o'clock or 9:15 or thereabouts. I look forward to meeting with the board at 7:30 tomorrow morning downstairs. Thank you very much.
Just one more thing before you leave. For tomorrow evening, the event at Bounty Farm, for all the foreign delegates, we'll be providing transportation from this location, and it will leave at a time that will be announced tomorrow. For those who are leaving via the Temeri Airport tomorrow evening, it would be better for you to check out, and then we'll just drop you over to the airport after that event. So you don't have to come back to this hotel and then go back. So that's just for tomorrow evening. All Guyanese participants, you could just find your own transportation to the event.